It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
Saturday night. This is One on One, wherever you may be and however you might be joining us. 90.7 FM, Facebook Live, our YouTube channel, WFUV.org. We are here with you from 11 to 2 on this Saturday, October 17th. Dylan Bassamo is the man on the other side of my Zoom screen. Jimmy Sullivan will be joining us momentarily with the headlines. Our producer, Alex Walls. Dylan, always a pleasure to be hosting one-on-one with you. A lot to get to regarding the abomination that is the New York Jets, some New York football, some college football, MLB playoffs, and a crazy, wild world of sports in the month that is October of 2020.
Yeah, Nick, certainly a lot to get to. And, like you said, it's great to be here. Everyone should know I'm an avid watcher of the television program Saturday Night Live. So it takes a lot for me to be here. I want to let everyone know this. I care deeply about this. That's why I'm here. But, following this crazy year we've been having, like you would think we've had sports back for a while now. You would think that part of the fun of it had worn off of it being back, but it's still such a wonderful feeling as a Saturday of sports, no matter what the sports are. So, I'm very excited for this wonderful Saturday, as I'm sure you have been also.
No, for sure. It's so weird to try and keep track of everything that's going on. You're trying to keep tabs on things that normally you don't have to work so hard as doing. I mean, yeah, we're kind of to more of a normal situation now when you will have the baseball playoffs coincide with NFL football and all the craziness there. But once you get into the NBA, and now you're talking about the NBA free agency frenzy and some of the moves that teams are making there in terms of personnel and coaching changes. And we're going to get into all this stuff with Daryl Morey stepping down as the GM of the Rockets in their coaching search. Ty Lue is going to be the head coach of the Los Angeles Clippers. So just a lot of moving parts and things where free agency may actually be more important than some aspects of NBA's regular season. So just trying to make sure we get to all of that. I want to sort of at least taper the conversation for a second to the abomination that is the New York Jets. And we're going to get into all of this and more as we continue throughout the show. But it's just amazing, as someone who is not a native New Yorker, to see just how poorly this organization continues to operate and continues to be run. And I hate to say it this way, but it's almost unfortunate for us. Like, I don't know what I did to deserve this punishment of having to talk about them continually, because it just gets tiring after a while. This team is so bad. And again, we'll get into it, but there's nowhere to go for them.
Well, Nick, I guess it's your punishment for coming to school in New York.
That's right.
But more than anything else, I think it's just, I think whenever we talk about the Jets, we should name the segment, "Oh, here we go again." Because that's what it's starting to feel like, or has felt like more for a long time. But you know what? Now that I think about it, it's interesting that the Jets play at MetLife Stadium, and MetLife having Snoopy as one of their mascots, because they're kind of the Charlie Brown of football teams, where every day, if any fan of the Peanuts comic strip knows, every day you're going to read the comic strip and something silly is going to happen to Charlie Brown. He's just going to let it happen, and that is kind of how the Jets seem to be running their organization for probably as long as you and I can remember, which is incredibly frustrating to watch and perhaps even more frustrating to cover.
we'll get into all that stuff. We'll open up with the Jets as we continue and talk some NFL COVID, some positive tests for a number of the organizations around the NFL and how everyone is dealing with all of those things. We learn this morning that the Jacksonville Jaguars have a positive test with an individual on their practice squad. New England Patriots also another positive test, and figuring out how everything will go from there. We'll talk some Nhl free agency, some big moves as the NHL opens up its offseason. In addition to the NBA, Alex Pietrangelo, Taylor Hall, Robin Lehner, and Torrey Krug on the move. We'll dissect all of those moves as we continue. MLB playoffs, they both continue after last night. The Tampa Bay Rays jump out to a 3-0 series lead and then cough up 3 straight games to the Houston Astros to set up a winner-take-all Game 7 of the American League Championship Series. That is tonight. The Dodgers stave off elimination in Game 5 with a big win. Will Smith with a huge home run off of Will Smith to give them the win there. So they take it and force a Game 6 down in Texas. And then, of course, as Jimmy Sullivan will be joining us with our headlines, Ty Lue to the Clippers, Daryl Morey, Jeff Van Gundy. Situation in Houston. Jeff Van Gundy, of course, the leader in the clubhouse, apparently, according to some of the reporting that I've been reading about the head coaching search for James Harden and Russell Westbrook down there in Houston. Daryl Morey stepping down. Apparently that was potentially the source of what was going on there and why Daryl wanted to step away. Stan Van Gundy, Jeff's brother, yes, they are brothers, will be meeting with the New Orleans Pelicans as well to detail their head coaching search. DJ Sixsmith will be joining Emmanuel Barbari and Jackson Heil as a part of our Off the Air podcast series. They will detail everything and everything from his experiences here at WFUV. And then, of course, we will get into Alabama and Georgia as the college football game of the week, perhaps the year. Really excited to watch all of that and everything surrounding it with Nick Saban. Is he going to coach tonight? Is he not? We'll figure it out. And then an NFL Pick'em segment to wrap it up with some of the games that we highlighted as we look forward to another NFL Sunday. Hopefully everybody stays healthy and allows it to happen. But it's just so interesting as we return maybe to the Jets for a minute, because what concerns me about them is that Adam Gase seems to have been given the keys to the kingdom. And it's just amazing because not only has he not done anything to deserve the type of power that he is wielding within their organization, it's just bad to me either way. Because he is either about to get fired at the end of this year, in which case he is being given autonomy over personnel decisions for a team that he's not going to be a part of next year, or he is making decisions in this way because he is going to be a part of the organization next year. And I think everybody and his brother that isn't Christopher Johnson understands that that is something that needs to stop. So I'm just interested to get your perspective, Dylan, on this, because I honestly don't think I'm too far away from saying, is it possible that he could get a third year?
And you know what? One thing I've learned of following the Jets and watching the Jets over these years has been to expect nothing, but also expect the unexpected. Like the worst thing you can do when looking at the Jets is having some kind of expectation of what they're going to do. Because in a lot of ways, they're very unpredictable. In a lot of ways, they are very predictable. And it turns into this odd thing where I also have no idea the fate of Adam Gase following this season. And, you know, either way, he is making those personnel decisions. And you could argue that they're poor decisions. So either way, it's detrimental. But to me, Adam Gase has feels like a coach who just kind of stands there and allows madness to happen. Doesn't really do too much about it. You know, hopefully he will be given responsibility for what happens. But at the end of the day, I don't really know.
Yeah, certainly hard to tell, and we'll have to figure it out, monitor the situation. He should have been gone a while ago, and they haven't made the move. Let's switch to the MLB playoffs, because that's the other thing that was really interesting for me to watch last night. And it's amazing because you look at the start that the Tampa Bay Rays got off to. They win Game 5 against the Yankees. They move on to the ALCS, and this team was just rolling. They were pitching really well, and they were getting things to go their way, because some of the sort of underlying numbers of the way that both of those teams were hitting early on in the series might have told you that the Astros were getting a bit unlucky. And that has certainly been the case in the last 3 games, where those numbers have sort of actualized and come to fruition, because Houston's on a roll right now, and the Rays are reeling, and they're trying to figure out, in a winner-take-all Game 7 situation, how to recover, because you're up 3-0, that series is over. And we've seen this well documented with the Yankees in 2004 against the Boston Red Sox. They're up 3-0 and then blow the lead. So it has happened before. But it's just amazing, because you'd think that with the way the Rays have gotten those timely hits, and the way that they play defense, and the way that they play baseball in the pitching, it's just remarkable to me to think that they would lose 3-0 to Houston, who has hit the ball very well, and I will give them credit for doing that. But you'd have to think that the bullpen and the starting pitching would be a bit suspect. They lose Garrett Cole in the offseason. Justin Verlander is out with Tommy John surgery, and yet Houston has found a way, Dusty Baker pushing the right buttons, to climb right back in this series. And I think you'd expect them almost, right? You got a team who wins 3 straight. How are they not going to win Game 7?
Yeah, you really can, not only just the fact that they've come back from down 3-0, but you can draw a lot of parallels between the 04 Red Sox and the ALCS and these Astros. If you look at those first 3 games of this series, the Astros look like a completely different team than they've been the last 3 of this series. They looked poor offensively. Defensively, they looked terrible. Jose Altuve made like 3 errors in what felt like 24 hours. It was a little abysmal, and seemed like a team that shouldn't have been in the playoffs in the first place. Not to mention the fact that they were one of the lower wildcard teams. But, these last 3 games, they have looked like the competitive team that we would expect from the Astros over these last, maybe half decade that they've been this competitive. But, the Rays, on the other hand, have not been particularly bad over the last 3 games. I think that, they've been playing pretty good ball over the last 3 games. The Astros have finally just caught up with them. The difference here is the Astros have just totally shifted gears in the last 3 games.
Yeah, it's been remarkable. And then we'll touch on the NLCS as well. Really surprised to see the Braves get out to the start that they did, and with really good starting pitching. And that's something that I don't know that I would have pegged Atlanta for. Not that I'm sleeping on their starting pitching, but they've had a couple injuries in that department, but have really been able to shut down a quality Dodgers offense. In the last 2 wins for the Dodgers, they've picked it up a bit. But just really impressed with what I've seen from the Atlanta Braves so far. And they look like a legitimate World Series contender, and that's what you get when you're in the NLCS. But I do think, as someone who was picking the Dodgers to win that series in 5, I mean, that thing was over. There was no way that Atlanta, with the pitching and the Dodgers offense, was going to be able to take down LA. They look like a team that has every opportunity, up 3-1, now up 3-2, to find their way to the World Series, and it'll be another disappointing exit for the Dodgers.
Very much so. I not only picked the Dodgers to win the series, they were my playoff pick to win it all. I think, and I'm sure I'm not alone on that. But in this series, you talked about the starting pitching for Atlanta in this championship series, but the bats have been flying too. They have looked like an all-around great team, and that's why they could win it tonight.
We'll see. It'll be interesting, and they definitely could. And I'm fascinated by that series just because of the way that it's played out, and just not something that you would expect. All right, we got to take a quick break here on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. We'll get to all the craziness and the mess that is the New York Jets on the other side of this break. Stay with us. sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Hour one of One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Nick DeLuca, Dylan Balsamo on the other side of your screen. Let's get into the Jets because they are just – it's funny, the question that you posed to me at break about can we play a game about the number of words that have been used to describe how putrid the New York Jets are. And there's another one, right? We're counting it down here. But the Jets this week were the talk of the NFL off the field as Le'Veon Bell was released, signs with the Chiefs. The Jets pulled the plug 5 games into season number 2 of a 4-year, $52 million deal. Adam Gase wielding a lot of power, and we got into this a little bit in the open. But Le'Veon Bell not happy with his usage, not happy with the carries. I think he had a right to be. And Adam Gase not happy with it, wishing that Bell would have tried to address it with him in person instead of going the social media route. Bell asked to, in no uncertain terms, be no longer a part of the organization. Jets attempting to trade him. Couldn't do it because of the numbers on the contract, and he is ultimately released. The Jets bite the bullet on the guaranteed money. It was around $27 million in that guarantee, and they'll suffer around a loss of $5 or $6 million in the dead cap. But Dylan, just another example of the Jets not only getting things wrong on the field, but off the field, because they are letting Twitter apparently run their personnel department.
Yeah, I'm always looking for opportunities to expand my vocabulary, which is why I posed that question to you. And for the Jets this season, their snafus have been superfluous. Mm-hmm. But more than anything, I think the situation with Le'Veon Bell displays the fact that the lack of a true product on the field is clearly a direct result of some lack of coordination off of the field, and we really got to see kind of a window into that this week with Le'Veon Bell. Yeah, of course he was upset with his lack of opportunities, because they just signed him to this big contract. Of course he should be getting more opportunities. Of course he's upset. Did I love the fact that he went to social media to address it? No, but he must have felt like there was no other way to do it. You don't just do that. So there's clearly something. There's something wrong with the Jets organization that we don't even get to know, that we got to see a window into this week with Le'Veon Bell.
No, look, he's got to address things better, and I don't like him going to social media at all. That's not the way to conduct yourself. It's just unprofessional, and that's the reality of the situation, because there's no reason. If you really want to mend things or make things better, there's no way that going to social media and liking a tweet about, hey, Adam Gase isn't using Le'Veon Bell right is going to help the situation. There's just no way. It's not going to happen. So I get that, where they're sitting there and saying, Le'Veon, you can't do that. And at some point, when you're an 0-5 organization and things are trending in the wrong direction, these are the types of things that will occur. Players will start to complain. We've heard Bradley McDougall, a couple players on defense, say that we're just not practicing hard enough. And Greg Williams had some comments when dealing with the media this week as well that I thought were a little curious, and we'll get into those in a second. But at the end of the day, it's just amazing to me that the types of things that are forcing the Jets' hand right now, and it comes back to the leadership in the organization and the head coach and the general manager. And I think that Joe Douglas has been let off the hook a little bit in this whole situation, but the team that the Jets are running out there is awful. And I understand that they have injuries, but the Jets, from a roster perspective, are awful. I found it funny because I saw a tweet a couple weeks ago where somebody said, if you combined the Chiefs and the Jets roster, they'd be insane. Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, Clyde Edwards-Helaire at running back. Well, now it could be Le'Veon Bell too. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Chiefs offensive line, Chiefs defense, because there's nothing about this team that is good at all. There's maybe Mekhi Becton, because he's had a good start to his career, although he's been hurt. But there's really nothing. There's nothing from a personnel perspective that is good about this team. And it's amazing. So Joe Douglas deserves the culpability in this as much as anyone as well, because they haven't built anything. But it just goes back to now Mike Maccagnan, who was their GM before Douglas gets here, who Adam Gase got fired because, again, they gave him the keys to the kingdom. He ran your free agency and your draft. He's the one who signed Le'Veon Bell for a coach who's going to get in there and say, I don't want him anymore. And it just doesn't make sense. It's not how you run the organization. And we've said this so many times in so many different ways using different vocabulary, but it's just mind-boggling that they continue to allow Adam Gase to run things, because he's not Bill Belichick. He's not Mike Tomlin. He's not even John Gruden, who there were questions about, but a dude who had a great track record coming into his second stint with the Raiders. They're just giving him Belichick level authority to come in and basically say, the GM that's here, no, he's no good. I'm going to hire my own GM. While we're searching for him, I'm going to be the GM myself. And then I basically am both the head coach and the president of football operations. And then whenever someone does something that I don't like, I'm going to cut him. And I'm not going to use this guy the right way because I didn't want him in the first place. It's just amazing to me that Adam Gase has continued to get the leeway and the flexibility that he has more than anything else. Because I even understand that the Jets don't want to make the change in season. And you could go down the list about maybe it would be detrimental to Sam Darnold to have Gase out. It's possible. I don't know. I think it would help him. But you know what? Who knows? You look at Ryan Tannehill. But at the end of the day, there is no way that this guy can have the amount of personnel control that he has exercised over the last couple of weeks and now into his second year. It's just mind-boggling to me. And it tells me one of two things, as I alluded to in the open. They're either really rolling with him, where he might get another year after this, potentially a chance to take Trevor Lawrence and say, oh, Sam Darnold's no good, he wasn't my guy. Or they're just giving Adam Gase the power to do whatever he wants, and they're going to fire him next year anyway, and either way, it's stupid.
Yeah, so here's the thing, and you touched on this a little bit, was there is no doubtedly a lack of talent on the field when it comes to the Jets. You know, the product they're putting on the field is just not what it could be. You know, you're in New York, you got the money. That's not part of the issue here. And I think you and I both know this, which is there is sort of a stigma around the Jets organization, and there has been for a while now. You know, anybody in the NFL social media community like understands that stigma. It's a running joke almost, the Jets organization. They have been for a while. You don't think that players see that? Players who are free agents who are looking where to sign, you don't think players who are, you know, coming up of a certain age, you know, a lot of these players are not that much older than you and I. They're aware of this. They're on social media. They see this stigma. Of course, they don't want to end up with the Jets, and that comes from this lack of organization in the organization. So what the Jets need to do more than anything, I think, is send a message to the league, to the players of the league, to future players that, like, we care and we're going to make changes. Everything has to change. I really think that. I think most everything is going to have to change. It's not just Adam Gase. It's more than that. It has to be more than that. And I think the Jets, if they're smart, will address that eventually. You know, they could have done that years ago. And send a message to the league that we want to be taken seriously. We want to be a serious organization. We want a shot at winning things. And we want to show you that.
Look, their roster isn't good, and there's been a ton of blame when you listen to Adam Gase talk, and Greg Williams, too, their defensive coordinator. You can see why those two get along, because they really like to blame players. But it's continually about the execution, and at some point, that's coaching, too. So if you guys are drawing up things or trying to run schemes or operate in a way that your players cannot execute, then at some level, that's still coaching. Because the Jets have a terrible roster, but it's also not that bad to where I think they should be non-competitive. Well, you should not be losing to Arizona by 20. Because Arizona struggled. They're coming cross-country, figuring everything out. Used by 20, non-competitive. And maybe that's not even the best example because you're starting to backup quarterback. But even San Francisco, same way. Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't finish that game, and you're getting blown out the way you are, giving up the 3rd and 30, whatever it was, against the 49ers, 31, I think it was. So there are just so many things, and it's just none of this happens if you get rid of the coach. That's the whole thing, right? None of this happens. No one's going to continue to if they chose Adam Gase over Le'Veon Bell. That's what they did when they cut Le'Veon Bell, right? Because none of this happens if you fire Adam Gase tomorrow. That's the reality of it, because all Le'Veon Bell wants to do is say, look, what we're doing right now doesn't work. So let's recognize that as an organization and move forward. So if they fire him, Greg Williams is the defensive coordinator and the interim head coach, and Jim Bob Cooter is calling the plays as the interim offensive coordinator, they're fine. Lev Bell's going to shut up. He's not going to complain anymore. All right, I get it. Good. Thanks for that. We got to move on. I'm willing to ride this out with this organization. Jets have gotten rid of their best player twice this season. Twice. How do you do that when it's Adam Gase who's the guy who can't get along with him? He couldn't get along with people in Miami. Ready to ship Devontae Parker out. Why do you think Jarvis Landry is no longer a Dolphin? So, it's amazing the way that all this stuff has worked. And I want to get to something that Greg Williams said too, because I thought this was really interesting. He met with the media, Greg 2Gs Williams, and said, they were asking him about how poorly the Jets are playing defensively right now, over 30 points a game. Jets were not terrible defensively last year. Maybe Jamal Adams would help that situation. But he goes, a lot of it's not all defensively. You'd have to figure that out. So things are so bad right now that the defensive coordinator of your team is in the media blasting your head coach and your offense when he's giving up 30 points a game. That's it. I get it from an ownership perspective that it is hard to get things right. If every time you hired a coach and you knocked it out of the park, if it was easy, everybody would do it. So it doesn't happen. But it's easy to identify when it's not working. And this is so far beyond dysfunction. When your defensive coordinator is saying, yeah, our offense and our head coach who coaches the offense can't coach. That's it. That's when it's time to pull the plug. And I'll get your take on this, because this is where I'm at with this situation right now. Christopher Johnson is going to be regarded at the end of this year as an owner that is worse than James Dolan.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the things that come to mind for me as you're talking is a couple different things. One, this is one of very few organizations in professional sports that will side with the head coach over the best player on the team. You know what I mean? Like, we've seen this situation before. Usually the organization tends to side.
Texans didn't. Guess what? Things weren't working with J.J. Watt and Deshaun Watson, and guess who was gone?
Yeah.
Wasn't Deshaun Watson.
Exactly. But here's the thing. I actually agree with the Jets defensive coordinator about it. It's not just the defense. Because here's the thing. Giants and Jets right now, both 0-5. Here's the difference between the two teams. You watch the Giants game this past week. I can look at that game and point out these are the clear weaknesses on the team. Offensive line is weak. Secondary is weak. Those are the things that need to be addressed. And, having a team is like a science experiment. You run it out on the field. Things are going to work. Things aren't going to work. You isolate the things that aren't working. You fix them, and hopefully things get better. You look at the Jets game against the Cardinals on Sunday. And, they're giving up a lot of points, yeah, but I can't – I mean, and maybe this is just me. There's nothing I can point at in particular to say that's the problem. You know what I'm saying? It's just like it's melded together into one giant problem to the point where you can't really tell what the issue is that you need to isolate. And that means the problem is Adam Gase. And that is the thing that needs to be addressed. I hope this is the end of things for him this year, but I don't know that. And nobody knows that.
I might want to push back on you with that statement just a little bit, because I think the problems extend farther beyond Adam Gase. I think it's an ownership issue, quite frankly, because it's about somebody who puts him in a position to wield the power that he does within their organization. And it's frustrating. I love it. I'm a Bills fan and I don't really care. I love to see the Jets lose, but you just sit there and at some point, as somebody who's a fan of football, you root against bad football, and that's what the Jets are right now. It was so funny. You read through the number of things that have been said ad nauseum about the Jets, and on ESPN they do power rankings with all of their team beat reporters. Rich Cimini of ESPN, weaknesses for the Jets football, because that's where they are right now. They are that bad. So I don't know. I'm interested. I'm kind of fascinated, actually, by this dynamic between ownership and Adam Gase, just because I do not think I will not go as far as predicting this, because I don't think that there's any way that Christopher Johnson can survive doing this in the New York market. I don't think so. I think people will at some point stop. They're not going to games right now, and they're so lucky, because I think if there were fans in the stands, that the moves made here might have been different. But people will stop watching and stop showing up if Adam Gase continues to be their head coach, and I think that will eventually force the hand. But I don't think it's out of the question that they say, you know what, we side with him again, and Sam Darnold wasn't the right guy. He couldn't play, couldn't digest what Adam Gase was trying to get him to do, and we're going to try and run it back with Trevor Lawrence with Adam Gase. I don't think that's crazy.
No, I think you're absolutely right. You and I both know a lot of things have to change, and I mentioned that earlier. It's more than Adam Gase that needs to change. You're absolutely right. The odds of that happening, I'm not much of a betting man myself. But I don't know. Like, that's what I was talking about in the open, is like the lack of predictability that surrounds this team, this organization, and has for a long time now, is insurmountable. I can't even, like, every week it's something new. It's the same old something new. I'm going to coin that phrase right now.
Yeah.
Every week is the same old something new.
It's the same old something new. Well, we got to hit a break. My blood pressure is up and just frustrated with everything that goes on with the New York Jets because we have to continue to talk about them and talk to them. We probably should, honestly, because I might be able to do a better job than Adam Gase. That's not an exaggeration, but it is what it is. We're not going to talk about the Jets when we come back, so stay with us right here on New York's longest running sports call-in show, One-on-One.
One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back, everybody. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Glad you could be with us on this Saturday night, almost Sunday morning. Now that we look at it, 11:38 p.m. Let's get to the headlines, and one of the top headlines in the last couple of days has come out of the NFL, and more specific, having to do with some issues they've had regarding the coronavirus. There's a bunch of headlines here. If you're having a hard time keeping track, we got you covered right here. So this is what's been going on over the last couple of days. Yesterday, the Indianapolis Colts had 4 positive tests, 1 player, 3 staffers. All of those are now believed to be false positives. This was seemingly confirmed by tests that were taken later in the day. The Patriots also shut down their practice facility yesterday after a player tested positive. They were testing a second anonymous player as well to see if he was positive. The Philadelphia Eagles have placed offensive lineman Matt Pryor on their COVID-19 reserve list. They're taking on the Ravens tomorrow. Now, just remember, those on the COVID-19 reserve list doesn't necessarily mean that they have the virus, but it can mean that they came into contact with someone who did. It is not entirely clear what is happening in that case. Just today, as Nick said earlier, the Jaguars had a practice squad player test positive. They shut things down at their facility today in advance of their game tomorrow against Detroit. Worth noting, all games at this moment right now, scheduled for both Sunday and Monday, are still on despite the positive tests. So we'll monitor that situation, see how things develop in the NFL. They've had games postponed over the last couple of weeks due to the coronavirus. Guys, little bit of concerning news out of the NFL, but as I turn things over to you, not entirely sure that this was unexpected as we started the season. I think we all thought there were going to be positives. We're seeing that now, and it's wreaking some havoc a little bit on the schedule, though not yet for this week.
Yeah, I think it's something that we certainly expected because there's no way to not expect it. This is the world that we live in 2020. where this virus is everywhere. I have been sort of surprised to see the number of cases among teams in the NFL, though. And I understand that the rosters are a lot bigger, but when you look at, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but how well Major League Baseball handled COVID. And it's not about necessarily inter-team spread. I understand how if somebody gets it with the Tennessee Titans, how that outbreak can happen because you've got people who are in such close contact. But what has surprised me is the number of positive tests just within all the numbers of the organizations within all these organizations, because baseball didn't seem to have that problem. They sort of were able to, at the beginning, say, okay, we've got a couple guys who have it, and you progressively would have a few guys who would pop up every once in a while who test positive. But it seems like almost all the time you are getting a number of players from a bunch of organizations who have this, and sort of really creating some not so strong footing with this whole operation. And you're just trying to tread carefully to make sure that everyone is safe and everything else. So it's just interesting to me because I did expect this, Jimmy, and I agree with you that we should have, but I'm also a little bit surprised at the frequency of the tests, just because baseball was able to really avoid it. And the NFL, who I thought through the first, say, 2 weeks did an excellent job with this. There were no hiccups, nothing. Maybe it's something with the weather getting a little bit colder and figuring out all that stuff, but that's been the thing that's been striking for me.
I would agree that I definitely expected this, and I would say I actually expected it to this extent. My opinion on this is actually perhaps stronger than other people's. While the first 2 weeks of the NFL season may have been handled well in terms of testing and keeping people separated, I think the scheduling of this NFL season has been completely irresponsible. You look at basketball, you look at hockey. These were very tight-knit bubbles. That's why it works so well. That's why the NHL last 7 weeks of their season, not a single positive test. That's really impressive. Of course, those bubbles worked well. Baseball, a little harder to do in a bubble. At least they kept things on the coast, between the coasts, between the East and the Central and the West. Those are the only teams you were playing. And when there was a positive case, everything associated shut down. The team you were playing shut down. The team that you already played, like it was coordinated in a way that took every precaution. While the NFL is taking precautions, as of course they have to, when the 49ers have to come to New Jersey to play, what are you doing? To quote many people during this crazy year, what are you doing? And perhaps I'm being too harsh on the issue, but I think the NFL could have handled scheduling better, and that might be the demise of the seasons. The fact that they did not try and take into account, because the NFL is the most even schedule, right, of all of the sports. It's a very succinct way that they do it, and they refused to really change that at all, basically at all this year. And of course, this was going to happen. Of course, it was going to happen.
I should also add in the headlines here that one of the chief medical officers of the NFL, Dr. Alan Sills, is against them going into a bubble because of the number of personnel involved, right? You think about an NFL roster, there's 53 players, and then there's however many more traveling personnel, coaches, staffers, so on, so forth. Bubbles are hard to do. They're talking about a bubble for the playoffs, which I think is probably reasonable, although it will be interesting to see. Roger Goodell has also floated the idea. Now, nothing's concrete yet, so I'm hesitant to add this note as well. Roger Goodell has floated the idea of a quote-unquote Week 18, which would basically be for teams that have games postponed. There's no mutual date that works. Let's stick it here in the first or second week in January. Now, a Week 18 would push back the Super Bowl. And if you push back the Super Bowl, there are wide-ranging programming ramifications for the networks because nobody wants to go up against the Super Bowl, and networks, CBS is the Super Bowl this year. They have a bunch of stuff already planned, I'm sure, for February 7th. I thought that was an interesting note, though, as well. And we'll see what the NFL does playoff wise. I almost think they have to go into a bubble just for the playoffs anyway, because you've got less teams, so you could probably accommodate it. We've seen the MLB postseason, as you were saying, Nick. They've had success in, a couple of hub cities, and they'll have the World Series in Texas. But the more I think about this, the NFL, can they get through the season? Absolutely. I do believe they can, if by nothing else, sheer will. But I think once you get to the postseason, the cash cow that is the NFL playoffs, and particularly the Super Bowl, I think is far too important to risk with travel and everything else that's involved. And to say nothing of the fact that the way the coronavirus is going in some of these places, some of these teams that would have home playoff games might not be able to have fans. That's a real possibility the way things are going. I mean, look at Wisconsin right now. Their positivity rate is up towards like 30%. So I think that's something that the NFL, the rate they're going, I think they should probably just go ahead and do that, cut their losses, and do what baseball did. If nothing else, make sure you get to the end of the season, because I think that is the most important focus now for the NFL as we've seen these rash of positive tests.
And again, it's not something that is terribly well defined because we're still learning a ton about the way this virus works, but you'd have to imagine that it would be more prevalent as things get colder. So presumably things are going to get worse, or at least you're going to have more positive tests and things like that. So I do think that a bubble is going to happen in the playoffs. I think it will, because as evidenced by Major League Baseball, where a bubble didn't really make a ton of sense in the regular season because you had so much and so many personnel and everything else, it just didn't make sense. So they weren't going to do that. But as you get into the postseason, the smaller numbers, it's more practical. I think that will be the same case for the NFL. They will pick some of the stadiums that they really like, potentially would allow them to have fans. Certainly won't happen in New York or New Jersey or anywhere over there, Wisconsin, the same way, where they've actually said, no, we're not going to have fans. So I'm sure they'll do it at Jerry's World, and Texas has been more than willing to sort of allow fans in that situation. And we'll see as they monitor the cases, because they need to make the health and safety of their players the first priority as well. None of this works if the players aren't healthy. But I do think they're headed for a bubble, and I do think we're headed for a Week 18. It's just going to happen. And it is what it is. And it's unfortunate for programming and for the NFL and everyone involved, and they may potentially lose some money there. But they're also going to lose less money on the Super Bowl and potentially negotiating some of that advertising and things like that than not playing 4 or 5 of their games during the regular season. I just think that from that perspective, where you sit there and then you get into the question of, oh, okay, well, is this legitimate? We didn't get to play this game. And it raises questions about the competitive balance of it all, which quite frankly makes it less entertaining. So they're going to go to a Week 18. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't know why they've waited so long, quite frankly, because this is something that needs to happen. If this is going to be the way this virus is going to operate, where you're going to get positive tests once a week from one of the teams in the NFL, if not more, you're going to have to postpone some games. It's going to happen. I don't think that the Bills and the Titans should have played Tuesday night. I think that's ridiculous. Now, again, as a Bills fan, was I, of course, upset about the way that the game went? Sure. They got their doors blown off, but that doesn't matter. That game shouldn't have happened. How are the Bills game planning for 2 of the teams when the Titans can't even follow the protocols? I honestly thought the Bills went into that game nervous about catching COVID. That's what they were worried about. And that's the thing that doesn't make sense to me. That game should have been postponed. You're asking teams to navigate. That's a safety concern too, by the way. Trying to figure out when you're going to play and playing on all these short weeks, in addition to COVID. So they're going to have to figure something out. I think a Week 8 is something that definitely needs to happen. A Week 18 is something that definitely needs to happen. But it's just been a scheduling nightmare, quite frankly. And now we're talking about the Patriots and Broncos. Are they going to get postponed again? Is another sort of thing that is being talked about. But that's where we're headed. It's going to have to be a Week 18.
Yeah, I totally understand how the Super Bowl is such a cash cow, and there's so much scheduling around it just outside of the actual game. I mean, we've been doing Super Bowl lead-ins of the program afterwards since like Lassie. Like it's become its own American establishment, the things around the Super Bowl, and that becomes its own business entity. And I absolutely get that. But I think more than anything, for one thing, I'd rather the NFL lose $1 billion over somebody lose their life to COVID because of a decision the NFL made. Maybe that's just me. But I think, in the last couple months, we were very lucky to have any sports back. When baseball came back, when basketball came back, we all kind of said, we're very fortunate that this is able to happen. And of course, by human nature, we got a little greedy. We want to have the NFL season that we're used to having, 17 weeks, and we have the Super Bowl on this day in February, and that's how it's going to be. I think we need to let go of that pride a little bit. I think that's the only thing keeping us from having a Week 18 of the NFL season or a Week 19 of the NFL season. These are all possibilities, and they all should be looked into. I think if a game is not, if it's not safe to play a game during the week, push it back. And perhaps I'm being, I'm the son of a nurse, so perhaps I'm being a little too more lenient than any business entity would allow me to be if I were running the NFL. But I think we all need to kind of let go of how we wanted the NFL season to go and just allow the NFL season to happen a certain way. I agree. Bubble's the only option for the playoffs, I think. Too many cold weather city teams are going to make the playoffs to go all over the place. And it's a little more reasonable with the less amount of personnel. But I think more than anything, not only we as fans, but hopefully the people in power in the National Football League, while it be a private organization, take that into account. That's my hope for the NFL season as we progress.
Yeah, and I think just a couple more interesting things to look at. If you have a Week 18, if the Super Bowl is pushed back a week, it would be President's Day weekend, which means we all get the day off after the Super Bowl. So that, I think, is an upshot.
I like it, Jimmy.
Well, we wanted.
I'm going to run for president just on that.
You got my vote.
You got my vote, too.
So I'm saying it's not all bad if that happens. It'll also be interesting to see if they do a bubble where they decide to go. Because Nick, you talked about Jerry World. The two cities that came to mind off the top of my head were LA and Vegas, both of which have new stadiums. So I think those could be interesting places to go as well. You stick the AFC in one city, the NFC in another. Not sure how exactly that will go, but guys, that's the latest with the NFL and their COVID-19 procedures and problems. Hopefully, one, everybody makes full recovery. Obviously, that's the most important thing here. And number two, we'll see where the NFL goes with this. But I think much like Major League Baseball and what we saw over the summer, the NFL having its own issues as they try to have as close to a normal season as possible in this truly bizarre and utterly inane year of 2020.
Yeah, for sure. It is bizarre. And I think that's absolutely the right word for it. You're talking about Tuesday night football this past week, and then Thursday night gets moved to Monday night. And never in my life did I think that they would be that flexible with an NFL schedule, because that's clear you can do it in baseball. Okay, your pitcher moves, or it's not that big a deal. When the game is played isn't as big. Football, it's kind of everything. Preparation is a huge deal in the NFL, and the recovery time and everything else. So I agree with you. It is bizarre, but hey, it's 2020. We're going to be saying that a lot throughout the show. We're going to have to take a quick break here on One-on-One. We'll get into NHL Free Agency on the other side of this.
flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Sullivan just joined us with the headlines, and Alex Wohl's doing the great work as our producer. Let's get into some NHL free agency. Some big moves here as it opened this past week. Alex Pietrangelo, the headliner, headed to the Las Vegas Golden Knights on a 7-year, $61.5 million contract. Torrey Krug on the move to the Blues, 7 years, $45.5 million. Taylor Hall, former Hart Trophy winner, on his way to Buffalo with the Sabres, a year, $8 million. And Robin Lehner stays in Las Vegas, 5 years, $25 million. So a free agency frenzy in both now the NHL and the NBA as they wrap up their bubbles and in their playoffs. Dylan, it's just been interesting to me to watch the way that all of this stuff has played out when you're talking about COVID and some of the revenue that has been lost by a number of these owners, to see how active the teams would be in free agency, throwing around some money, and in particular Las Vegas, who has apparently become a free agent destination.
Yeah, I mean, if the Vegas Golden Knights have proven anything to us over the last 3-4 years, is that not only does it seem like a successful place to play hockey, but it also seems like a very fun place to play hockey. I don't think, credit to whatever executives thought that Vegas was going to be a good place for a hockey team, because I would never have thought of that. But it seems like they got a great organization going and a fun one to be a part of, and they've had some success. Already been to a Stanley Cup final very early in their existence. So yeah, of course they're a great place to go. I'm happy for them as an organization.
Yeah, no, I like what they're doing, and it's amazing because I was listening to Chris Hennessy, Jackson Isle do 5-on-3 the other day whenever their podcast came out, and check it out if you get a chance, because those two did a very good job. There are hockey guys here, but it was interesting because they're just outlining the market shift in how Vegas has gotten to where they have gotten in such a short time as an expansion franchise. And it's well documented, the trip to the Stanley Cup Finals in year one, something that I don't think anyone would have dreamed of, let alone even an expansion team making the playoffs. And the NHL helped them out a little bit with some of the competitive balance stipulations that were put in to make sure that they were going to be a competitive organization right off the bat. But they are just doing a great job of making the right moves. They have accumulated the talent that they had in the expansion draft and have drafted well and have used picks and moved them smartly to contend with some of the trades that they've made. But I've just been really impressed with the way that organization has operated, because it's so difficult as an expansion franchise to kind of get your footing. And Vegas has done it better than any franchise we've ever seen. And now you're talking about one of the premier defensemen in all of the NHL making the move to Las Vegas and making them a pretty legitimate Stanley Cup contender, or even more so than they were already.
Very much so. It's very interesting, Pietrangelo coming to Vegas, because, anybody who watched the Stanley Cup playoffs this past year, while it was in a bubble, the Western Conference playoffs were fun, and the Golden Knights were an incredible team to watch. They really gave the Stars a run for their money in the Western Conference finals. So the fact that now Pietrangelo was there, the defense was already pretty good. Now it's that much better. They have to be the team to beat, at least in the Western Conference, if they were not already.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next. Do you think they are the team to beat in the Western Conference? I don't know if I'm ready to go there yet, because I liked what Dallas did this year, and there are some pretty good organizations out there as well. But I am tending to, I don't know if I'll agree with you there. I still like what Dallas has done, and I think that they may be able to make a run as one of the teams that was sort of there for most of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and I like what they did. So Torrey Krug goes to the Blues. Blues are another team that I like, and I think that's a big move for them to add to some of their forwards. And then Taylor Hall, which I thought was an interesting decision. Of course, me again being from Buffalo, interested in him signing with the Sabres, but I think that was a head scratcher for a lot of people around the NHL. And you and I both, as people who have covered the Devils at one time, and seeing him at least for his start before he was shipped off to Arizona nearing the trade deadline last year, it was just an odd move, because he had talked about how he wanted to win and join an organization that was committed to winning. And it doesn't seem to me that the Buffalo Sabres check almost any of those boxes. It's not like he's getting a significant long-term deal in this. He's getting the year for $8 million to try and recoup the value. But it seems to me that he's trying to bet on himself relatively with the one-year deal. $8 million is not a bad number, but he's going to go in there, be on the same line with Jack Eichel, and see if the two of them can really lead him to a more lucrative long-term contract.
Absolutely. I would totally agree with the fact that, the Sabres didn't seem to be the right fit for him right now, maybe in the future, but certainly not right now. And I think what it might come down to, as perplexing as a move as it seemed to have been, that perhaps he took a quote unquote pay cut. These numbers are too big for me to actually comprehend them. But he takes his contract perhaps almost to advertise himself to the rest of the league, where, perhaps if he does want to win, maybe he wants to do it somewhere else other than Buffalo. And this is a stop for him to take a stage, pair up with Jack Eichel, and show the rest of the league what he's got. And perhaps, maybe this season after this coming one, we'll see him somewhere else, perhaps a team that's a little more fit to win it all. But perhaps this is just a way for him to stand on a stage and tap dance for the league and say, I'll show you what I got.
Yeah, it's interesting. And at $8 million a year, that's an expensive tap dance. So he can certainly hang his hat on that, because that's still a very good number. I just am surprised because of how badly the Sabres organization is operated over the last, my goodness, it's the last 10 to 15 years. And they have just continually churned through coaches and general managers, and just not won, and not been able to draft the right players and not find the right players outside of Jack Eichel. He's the only one, and they were sort of handed that too by tanking, and they haven't really been able to recover. And it's just not a great situation there, I think, just in terms of roster. But they've got a new GM again, a coach that they seem to be confident in Ralph Kruger, and a guy who has some significant experience with Taylor Hall, and the two of them have a very good relationship. So that could be part of it as well. It was just sort of a head scratcher. That's the only way you can say it, because it was just not something that you would have expected Taylor Hall to do, especially when he's taking the 1-year deal, probably the largest number that he could have gotten. The Sabres did have some salary cap space, but just it was curious, and I'm interested to see how that works out, because very often you're talking about contending teams making those types of moves, and the Sabres are certainly not that, and it might have made more sense for another team to really jump on that opportunity, whereas the Sabres were able to do it. I want to shift gears to the Rangers a little bit, because that's a team that we certainly follow, and we can jump in with the Islanders here as well if need be. But have you been surprised by sort of the inactivity by really both of these New York franchises? Because you're sitting there as two teams that should be on the right. I feel like the Rangers or the Islanders should have been all over Taylor Hall. For 1 year, $8 million, you feel like one of those two teams, both of them ascending, should have been right there saying, yeah, this is a guy that we want to add to our forward group and can really be a difference maker.
100%. I think of both the Rangers and the Islanders as teams that are right outside of the huddle of teams that can really win right now and want to jump right in. The Rangers obviously, won the draft lottery and got their guy, as it seems to feel like for the Rangers organization. And the Islanders were just flat out a good team this year. I really do think that. They both could have used Taylor Hall, and now he's not that far away. Only, was it like a 4-hour drive between New York City and Buffalo? Next
6.
Okay, cool. I have family up in Buffalo myself, so I've done that drive before myself. But he's not that far away, which makes this even more of a helmet scratcher of a move, as you might say, in this sport. But he could have been a nice 1-year addition to either of these teams that are looking to jump in with teams like the Lightning, as we can compete for the Eastern Conference title. The Islanders were, as I said, they were a pretty good team this year. The Rangers are going to be a better team this year than they were last year. Taylor Hall would have been perfect for them. So you're right. It just makes it even more perplexing and baffling.
Yeah, it does. It's odd. But hey, again, maybe he wanted to be in Buffalo, or it could be the combination of things, because he feels more comfortable with sort of that organization and the people that are there. He knows Ralph Kruger well, as I alluded to, and that could have been a big part of it. And playing with Jack Eichel, because at the end of the day, if it's about making the money, he could go to the Rangers and play well, but he's not going to have sort of that same opportunity maybe as he would as a guy who's going to get every power play minute that is available and a load of ice time that may conflict with some of the things the Rangers are going to want to do in their top 6. Artemi Panarin is going to be more of a focus of the things that they want to do. And you would think that Taylor Hall could play alongside of him, and that would certainly add to what he's trying to accomplish as well. But probably more opportunity just by the nature of the team not being as good. I want to shift back to Vegas for a second, because they also re-signed Robin Lehner, and they seem to be confident in that tandem as they look forward to a goaltending situation with him and Marc-Andre Fleury. And it's interesting to me because I'm sitting here and thinking about how good that Fleury had been for a long time, and they want to move forward with Robin Lehner. And that was the one sort of thing that I sat there and said maybe they could do a better job of. I thought Robin Lehner was good at times and had really sort of come on toward the end there. But I think that the goaltending situation in Vegas is also something that they need to pay attention to.
Very much so. And, you go back and watch the Stanley Cup playoffs from this last year. Robin Lehner was pretty good for the Golden Knights. He kept them in that series at times with the Stars, when the Stars could have won that series quickly, as good as the rest of the Vegas team was. But you know what? It seems to be a trend in the last 2 years of the NHL, a trend very similar to one we could see in baseball pitchers, in the more perhaps economical use of pitchers. We've seen openers in the playoffs and then a guy who goes 6 innings and a guy who closes it out. Just these different uses of pitchers to get more out of different guys. And, the Rangers used, a handful of goalies this year. And perhaps that's the way to go. Perhaps that's the trend in the NHL, where Lehner and Fleury, who are now it's very rare that two of your poster children for a franchise are both goaltenders in hockey. It doesn't happen very often. So maybe the move is to split time, maybe not evenly between the two of them, but closer to evenly than we might think. And that this is a trend in the NHL of having more than one goalie as your main guy.
Well, I don't think it's disputed. Lehner's going to start. I don't think there's any bones about that. I do think that's clear. Maybe the best way to answer to ask that question is if you think that that's a move that can really sort of put them over the top in addition to Pietrangelo. And I think the answer is yes, because we both view Vegas as a bona fide Stanley Cup contender, and that just is interesting to me because I'm really high on Vegas, and I like what they've done. Dallas is going to be tough for them to unseat because they gave them really a run for their money in dealing with everything this past playoff run here. But Robin Lehner was certainly an instrumental part in keeping them in that series. I also wanted to get your thoughts on one other sort of happening in the NHL, and that's Joe Thornton as of, was it last night? Joe Thornton agrees to a 1-year deal, $700,000 with the Toronto Maple Leafs, who have been an organization that has sort of scuffled in the playoffs the last few years, a team that feels like they should be in the position that the Islanders were in, which is kind of funny when you look at John Tavares jumping ship from the Islanders to Toronto. But they have just continued to not get it done in the playoffs, and it was another early ouster this year, short of where they want to be. Not that I think that Joe Thornton is going to make much of, if any, a difference. And the guy he's pretty old these days. He's getting up there. But just it's going to be amazing to me to see Joe Thornton in another uniform after so many years in San Jose, and potentially a shot to be more competitive in the latter stages of his career than he has been in San Jose, who was not very good this season.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. It's a very interesting situation for the Maple Leafs because they are a better team than their playoff record over the last couple of years would tell you. They've got a lot of talent. Nobody's denying that. Austin Matthews, John Tavares, to name a couple. But yeah, they have underperformed in the playoffs. And it's a little unexplained. Like, I don't really know why, to be honest with you. But, like you said, Joe Thornton is not going to put a team like the Maple Leafs over the top. But, not to cross sports reference, but here I go. You look at the 2015 Mets. Bartolo Colon was not the kind of guy who makes the team. Who makes a team, excuse me. He made the team, of course. He's not the guy who, melds your team together. But he is this older player who can act as sort of a guiding light at times. And, and he brings it when he's on the field. Joe Thornton can bring it when he's on the ice. Perhaps there's a parallel there. Every team that I've seen be successful has at least one guy who is a veteran, who has more experience than everybody else, and kind of pushes you forward. Perhaps Thornton is that for the Maple Leafs, a team that maybe needs it.
Yeah, I think they could use some veteran leadership, because when you get to a point in the postseason, and it's something that we kind of have seen with the Yankees actually the last couple of years, you get to the here we go again point where you just have a number of difficult playoff exits and you continue to try and keep that mentality. Joe Thornton, a guy who has been there and done that and has seen it all. He's 41 years old. He's a leader, a guy who's been the captain for San Jose for a number of years, and he's really, I thought, from afar, fostered a pretty good culture and environment there for teams that were really competitive. And I think he will be a great addition to their locker room. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to Austin Matthews and John Tavares and how they use their salary cap space, because they're up against it in a year where you're talking about owners potentially dealing with losses of money, and how active are teams going to be in free agency, and where is the salary cap going to be, because that's not necessarily defined. So are Toronto, are some of these other teams that have been really competitive going to have to sit there and say, we need to operate differently, we need to make different moves? Or maybe this guy that we wanted to go after, a Taylor Hall, isn't going to be available to us because we don't want to spend that money, or can't do it because the salary cap isn't even in a place that we expected it to be coming into the season. So it'll be just a towing of the line for a lot of these organizations to try and figure out just exactly where they need to see things financially and where things need to fit as they go forward, as NHL free agency rolls on here in the middle of October, which is kind of weird, but it's 2020 and that's where we are. We got to take another break. On the other side, we're going to take a look at the MLB postseason, ALCS Game 7, NLCS Game 6. We'll have all the previews for you right here on One on One. Stay with us. To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Here on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Nick DeLuca, Dylan Balsamo, the other guy on my Zoom screen. So we get to the MLB Playoffs, Game 7 of the ALCS between the Tampa Bay Rays and the Houston Astros. Rays win the first 3 games, take a 3-0 series lead. The Astros come storming back to tie the series at 3 apiece, a winner-take-all game tonight. And then on the other side, in the National League Championship Series, the Braves out to a 3-1 lead. The Dodgers do take Game 5 last night to make it 3-2. Dodgers 1 win away from forcing a winner-take-all Game 7 in the NLCS as well. Some very good baseball that is being played by the two sides. And Dylan, I want to start with the ALCS just because of the craziness that has transpired there when you're talking about a team that initially takes a 3-0 series lead, and then the Astros, who nobody likes, have come storming back to tie this thing and look like they have a shot, where you were sitting there, 3 days ago saying, no, the Rays are rolling and this series is over.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the Astros as a team nobody likes. These are two teams that have had very specific narratives this season. I would argue more than definitely anyone else in the American League. All eyes have been on the Astros all year. We know this because they've been the team we want to see what happens now that we know everything. And the Rays have been a team that kind of jumped out of not that we didn't expect them to be any good, but I know I didn't expect them to be this good, and they have been really, really good, as proven from really these 6 games, I would say. But yeah, this is a very interesting series. Like I talked about in the opening, I don't think the Rays have been playing badly over the 3 games that they've lost over the last few nights. I just think the Astros have really upped the ante since being down 3-0. And now we have a really even series going into this winner-take-all Game 7 tonight. I'm very excited for this game.
It's just been fascinating to me, just as well as the Rays pitched in the first 3 games of the series. They really got good outings from Tyler Glasnow and Blake Snell, and just Ryan Yarbrough was able to pitch well for them too, just in seeing that. Charlie Morton, Glasnow pitched Game 4, so that's not the first 3 games. Glasnow pitched Game 4, but Charlie Morton was really good for them. It's amazing how things can turn. And one of the number of things that we've heard from perhaps some of the players in dealing with an environment with no fans is that momentum can shift perhaps a little bit more quickly than you might think otherwise. And I think that a 3-0 series comeback may be a little bit more difficult to pull off when you're talking about a home field advantage and the momentum of being 1 win away from the World Series. And when you got an empty stadium, you're playing in San Diego and it's Houston and Tampa Bay. I think some of that fire and intensity is taken away. But at the beginning of the series, Houston was just getting unlucky. I mean, they were hitting the ball hard. They were hitting the ball well, and the Rays were playing really good defense in the first 3 games of that series. And I thought the Tampa Bay's bullpen was doing an excellent job. But Houston has found a way to scratch and claw and get enough starting pitching, because that's the thing for me that has been most striking about this series is the Houston pitching staff. They have done more than enough to put themselves in a position to go to the World Series, where I did not think that would be at all possible. When you're talking about losing Justin Verlander and Garrett Cole to free agency, and what is that back end of the bullpen going to look like? Because it wasn't very good last year to begin with, and that was one of the reasons why they were so heavy on using Verlander and Cole as frequently as they did and as aggressively as they did for as long as they could, because they were afraid about going to the bullpen. And that really hasn't been necessarily the case this time around, because they don't have that same quality of starting pitching, and yet guys have stepped up and found ways to get outs for them. And Ryan Presley has been a guy who, as their closer now, has been particularly impressive to me. Not that he has been shut down all the time, but they have just been able to continually hand him the ball night in, night out. I think he's pitched 5 nights in a row now, and he has done the job enough for them to find ways to win. And it hasn't always been great. In Game 5, he gives up that double to Adames with the tying run at the plate, where that ball hits off the base of the wall, and he is maybe 2 feet, 3 feet away from tying that game with a home run in the late stages of the 9th inning. But they've done enough, and I did not think that was going to be possible. I've been really impressed with the Astros pitching staff, more so than anything else, because that's what's kept them in this series. In addition to the hitting that they have, we knew they could hit. We knew they'd be able to keep things competitive on the offensive side of the baseball. but the way that they have been able to piece things together from a pitching staff perspective, you knew the Rays were going to pitch really well. You knew that they had an offense that was capable enough and could come at you with a lot of different looks and attack in a lot of different ways. The question mark has been the Astros pitching. First 3 games, not so much, but the last 3 games, they've really shown up and put themselves in a position to potentially walk away and go to the World Series for a second straight year.
Well, you're absolutely right regarding momentum, like you were talking about earlier. I would imagine that, like you said, it's probably very difficult without fans to have any shift in momentum, and you have to create your own more than, as much as these guys probably had to do in their high school baseball games that nobody was there to see. So it's a whole different discipline, I'd imagine. But you're also absolutely right regarding the Astros pitching has been very good in this series, better than I expected it to be, even better than it was during the regular season, I would argue. We knew the bats were good, like you were saying, and that's probably what got them to squeeze into the playoffs. But the pitching came to play during this postseason. That's why they are where they are right now. Unfortunately, they've had to face a Rays offense that has been so good, specifically in this series, but they have been really good throughout this whole playoffs. They got a lot of guys who can hit. They have a true, what you might call a true American League lineup. It is almost, as much as perhaps we don't want to see the Astros win for one reason or another, it has been quite fun to see them even up this series and create an environment for this Game 7 that's going to be very entertaining to watch. I have no idea what's going to happen tonight, but it's going to be good.
I thought some of Dusty Baker's comments after the game were pretty funny too, because he said, you got to love this team. Well, no, actually a lot of people hate this team, but you got to respect what we're doing. And I do agree with that to some degree. I do respect what the Astros have been able to do, but I'm full disclosure, very much rooting against them just because I don't like to see teams that did what they did rewarded. And that's the tough part for me, as much as I'm not really rooting for the Rays either, because they knocked the Yankees out of the playoffs, and not a huge, from a Yankee fan perspective, not a huge advocate for the Rays here. I don't think that baseball wants to see Houston in the World Series, and I don't think that baseball fans should want to see Houston in the World Series either, because you're just sitting there and rewarding cheating that's there. That said, I'm sure a lot of people would watch, especially if it were to be Astros and Dodgers potentially again, and that I think would be a really interesting matchup to try and break down and see how that would go. Dodgers are on the brink as well, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I have been impressed with the way that the Astros have really turned the tables, and particularly on offense. It'll be Charlie Morton who will be getting the start for the Rays against Lance McCullers. Tampa Bay Rays manager Kevin Cash saying this is not the scenario that we wanted, 3 straight defeats, but this is a resilient group, and they are. They battled through a lot of adversity and downing the Yankees in the ALDS in Game 5. Topsy-turvy roller coaster of a series there, where the Yankees get off to the good start in Game 1, and then when push comes to shove, you're in Game 5 facing up against Garrett Cole, and they find a way to win a 2-1 game. So I don't know who you've got for tonight or who you're going to pick to advance to the World Series, but I think as funny as it sounds and as ridiculous as this may seem, I do think that the Rays, again, going into Game 7, have the advantage in starting pitching, and I think the Rays are actually going to win tonight.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to take, if I had to take a team tonight, it's going to be the Rays. While as much as, I don't love the Astros either, full disclosure. But as much as I do want to see an Astros-Dodgers World Series just to see what can happen. I do think the Rays are going to win tonight. I think they are overall the better team. And we'll see that tonight. They faltered a little bit in the middle of that series with the Yankees, but they did come up to bat against the former Astro Garrett Cole, and were able to pull out that Game 5 win. You're right. They're a resilient team. But to what you were saying about the Astros earlier, it is fairly respectable that they've been able to get this far in this season, despite what you might say were their own adversities this season that they didn't see coming. in losing Garrett Cole and losing Justin Verlander. And I'm also a huge Dusty Baker fan. Clearly a very good manager. And that was probably the messiest team any manager has maybe ever had to pick up. Just an organization where you got to stand up there and be the face of a team not many people are going to like. And I really respect Dusty Baker for that. But nonetheless, I will take the Rays tonight also.
I agree with you. Dusty Baker deserves a ton of credit for a guy that it didn't look like he was going to manage again. Teams weren't 100% interested in him taking over as a guy who just sort of represents old school baseball. And that's not sort of where a lot of the analytics people and a lot of the organizations in Major League Baseball are headed right now. But I think the Astros had enough of a focus on the analytics and the way that their team is constructed that they could have used a little bit of that manager's touch and that old school approach. And Dusty Baker deserves a lot of credit for what he's done down there in Houston. We'll see how it plays out. Game 5 again tonight, Charlie Morton, Lance McCullers Jr. is the pitching matchup. And I'm fascinated to see who's going to be representing each league in the World Series. The ALCS will conclude tonight. As for the other side of the bracket, the NLCS, it's the Dodgers and the Atlanta Braves. Braves out to a 3-1 series lead as they have done work offensively against this supposedly pretty good Dodgers pitching staff, but Clayton Kershaw, Walker Buehler not having the success that we might have expected them to have. The Dodgers bullpen that has normally been very reliable has also struggled at times throughout this series. So you get to 3-1, you get to the game last night, and the Dodgers prevail 7-3 over Atlanta to make it a 3-2 series. The key at bat from the game has to be the battle of the Will Smiths. Will Smith, the catcher for the Dodgers, against Will Smith, the left-hander reliever for the Braves. Well, this just in, Will Smith prevailed. It was the Will Smith, the catcher, who hits the 3-run home run to really break that game open and give the Dodgers the lead. Things weren't looking good for LA for a long time during that game. And I think the most concerning part of this series for the Dodgers is they just haven't found ways to score runs. And for an offense that is supposed to be one of, if not the best in all of Major League Baseball, with two former MVPs in Mookie Betts and Cody Bellinger, they have just not produced hitting the baseball. And I think that that's the cause for concern, because it's just the variability of the playoffs. When you get into the 7-game series, 7 straight days in Atlanta, a lot of credit to them and their pitching staff, as I alluded to in the open, because you didn't think that they were going to be able to pick up the pieces after some of the injuries they've had. Their bullpen, I think, is very good, and we knew that, but the starting rotation, they've been able to find a way. But the Dodgers have really struggled on the offensive side, and they were able to figure it out with a big home run last night, but on the whole, they have not been consistent enough in scoring runs to beat a really good and well pitched, a very good pitching staff in Atlanta.
Yeah. Well, first off, I must agree. The battle of the Will Smiths was a highlight of this MLB season. It's nice to see Will Smith of the Dodgers prevail, which I guess makes him the Fresh Prince of LA. But, but more than anything, first off, credit to the Braves. They've been a very good team this year. They are playing a very good series. Not only has the pitching been good, as we would expect from the Atlanta Braves organization, but the bats have been very good also. Freddie Freeman's having himself a good series, along with a lot of his teammates. This has been an offensive wrecking in some senses for the Atlanta Braves. Maybe not in every game, but at least in the majority of them. But, that being said, for the Dodgers, I think what this might come from, and perhaps this is me putting this on them psychologically, but if I'm the Dodgers, I'm a little nervous about how these playoffs are going to go, because this is supposed to be this is the year the Dodgers are going to prove they were as good of a team as they should have been the last 2-3 years, when they were gypped out of 2 World Series, you might say, by organizations that were not following the rules. And I would imagine that if you're the Dodgers, that has somewhat of an emotional tax on you, where you're like, this is it. This is where you got to prove yourself. The Astros might be out of the way by tonight. Yankees are out of the way. No Nationals. this is their time to prove that they should have had those 2 World Series championships in 2017 and 2018. So I would imagine that's making them nervous. I don't know if that accounts for everything, but you're right. The offense has been not what you want it to be. It's almost like they saved all their runs for that 1 inning in Game 3, the 11-run first inning. But you're right. Kershaw and Walker Buehler have not been what you would want from them. And I would imagine this is a time where the doors are seeming to shut in on a Dodgers team that perhaps lost their chance, unfortunately, in 2 World Series. But if they can't prove it now, then that's going to be taxing on them emotionally.
And are you talking about the Dodgers as one of the best teams to never win a championship? That is a very real conversation right now if they're not able to get it done. The one really important thing for the Dodgers is to fix that bullpen. And I thought they did a very good job last night of piecing it together. Dustin May is sort of their opener, but then Joe Kelly is able to get out of a jam. Blake Trinan 6 up, 6 down. Pedro Baez allows a hit, but a scoreless inning for him. Victor Gonzalez is able to clean things up from that perspective, and Buster Graterol and then Kenley Jansen. So they really rolled out the bullpen game. But Kenley Jansen has been a guy who's been much maligned, and they're trying to figure out if he's even a reliable option as a closer. Can they continue to allow him to close games? And they had major worries about him, but he was able to strike out the side last evening. So they're setting up a Game 6. Dodgers trying to push it to a winner-take-all Game 7. Do you think the Dodgers are able to get that done, or are we talking about the Atlanta Braves in the World Series after 6 games?
If you're asking me who I think is going to win tonight, I'm going to go with the Dodgers. I'm going to take the Dodgers tonight. For one thing, I do want to see them in the World Series. There's a part of me that's rooting for them to show the world that they should have won 2 World Series in the last 5 years. But I also think there's a resiliency that comes with being down to your final game. And I think this is a Dodgers team that's going to rise to that occasion. And that's going to be a really good Game 7 if it happens, because these are 2 very good, very evenly matched teams, I think. But I'm going to take Dodgers tonight. How about you, Nick?
I'm going to take the Braves, actually, because I think that Atlanta's going to close it out. The Dodgers have been just too inconsistent. They're going to close out the Dodgers. Sorry, Dodgers aren't going to close it out. The Dodgers have been just too inconsistent in their approach in various facets of the game. Their starting pitching has been good and bad and up and down. Remind me a lot of the Yankees, actually. I can't believe I'm saying that. But the starting pitching, in particular the bullpen, which was supposed to be a strength when you're talking about Blake Trinan being added to Joe Kelly and Kenley Jansen and Graterol and the arms they have down there, they haven't really produced as much as you'd like. And I've really loved what I've seen out of Atlanta's starting pitching. Credit to Atlanta, who have found a way to get it done. Marcell Ozuna has been a man possessed in this series. He's been absolutely fantastic with the way that he has swung the bat, and it's going to be a major reason why they, in my opinion, will be headed to the advancing from the NLCS onto the World Series. I'll get that right eventually. We're going to have to take a quick break here on One-on-One. On the other side, we will get to some more headlines with our man Jimmy Sullivan. Stay right here on 90.7 FM. Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back, everybody. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show, 12:41 a.m. Glad you could be with us on this Saturday night turned into Sunday morning. My guys, Nick DeLuca and Dylan Balsama will be alongside in a minute. I'm Jimmy Sullivan, back with some more headlines. Got some basketball headlines to get to at this hour. And we'll start with the Los Angeles Clippers, who have a new head coach. His name is Ty Lue. It'll be a 5-year deal for Lue. It's believed to be in the $7 million range. That'll put him up there among some of the highest paid coaches in the NBA. He had a 128-83 record over his 4 seasons, should say parts of 4 seasons, with the Cleveland Cavaliers, including an NBA championship in 2016. Of course, he replaces Doc Rivers, who parted ways with the organization in late September after the Clippers were shockingly bounced out of the playoffs in the second round after blowing a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets. Rivers went 307 and 185 in his 7 seasons with the Clippers. Now it will be Ty Lue's turn to try to get the franchise over the hump another year with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George whenever the new NBA season starts. Guys, I'll turn it over to you. Ty Lue, head coach of the Clippers. What were your initial thoughts when you saw that he would be replacing Doc Rivers on the sidelines in LA?
Well, I thought it was weird that Ty Lue got a 5-year contract offer from a team in LA. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong organization. My bad. That's what I was thinking about. But yeah, no, it was interesting. I kind of thought they were going to go this way just because you don't make the move, or it would lead you to believe that they were interested in Ty Lue, because if Ty Lue remains on their staff with Doc Rivers as the head coach, he's leaving to go be a head coach somewhere else. So you almost feel like you don't make that move getting rid of Doc Rivers if you don't have a plan in place that includes at least Ty Lue as the favorite to become your head coach. Now, you could always go through the interview process or understand that maybe Kawhi Leonard and Paul George want someone else to be their head coach. It's possible. And maybe you go in and talk to them beforehand to see and try and ascertain what exactly was going on with Doc Rivers and if your organization will be made better by having Tyronn Lue in the position of head coach as opposed to assistant head coach. But this move, I don't think, is terribly surprising. I think it's going to end up being a good move for the Clippers. Ty Lue is a guy who has been there and done that at maybe the most difficult situation that any coach could ever sort of be in, jumping right into a championship race with the Cleveland Cavaliers, where they're number 1 in the East, but the head coach gets fired, and now you're trying to navigate being an interim head coach and then fall down 3-1 to the Warriors, and we know how that ended with LeBron James. So he's coached as tough a player in an environment as there is to coach in LeBron James with Cleveland in 16 and 17. And I think he's going to be a good fit for the Clippers. I think a lot of the players there respect him, know what he brings. And at the end of the day, I think they just needed a change in culture. Ty Lue is a guy who is a winner. He's an NBA champion, and not that Doc Rivers isn't, but he's a guy who has blown a couple of 3-1 leads, and they have not had playoff success with Doc Rivers since he has been a member of the Clippers, and they're just going to need to find a way to sort of buck that trend. I think it starts with a bit of a new culture, and Ty Lue is, I think, a guy who can go a long way towards building what they want to build. And it was clear that Steve Ballmer wanted to build a new culture and go in a new direction. And that was Ty Lue, because you want to take some of what worked well. You don't want to necessarily just blow it up right away, because they were one of the best teams in the NBA throughout the duration of the season. But things needed to change. And I think that's the right balance of change and also staying the same.
Absolutely. I think parting ways with Doc Rivers and putting Ty Lue in that position, it certainly is sending a kind of message, not only to the team, but to the rest of the league. It's like, this is the time for the Clippers to win. This is that's the message that they're sending. And I think more than anything, you're also sending a message to your own players about we care about winning right now. And what better guy to put in that position to do that than someone who has really been under the hot lights. Imagine being in first place and being without a coach and being the coach to be put in that position. I can't imagine what that's like. And then going down 3-1 in the NBA finals and coming back. That's really the mark of a coach who can perform under the pressure and more importantly, get his players to perform under the pressure. So that is the message that putting Ty Lue as your head coach sends to your club specifically, is that this is the time. We're going to do whatever we can. We're going to win right now. Not to mention, you think of LA counterparts, as Nick mentioned earlier. Ty Lue is the head coach of the Clippers, sends a message to LeBron James on the Lakers also. Is like, we care about winning, we care about beating you, and Ty Lue's going to help us do it.
And you're talking about the Clippers beating the Lakers. They have to get in a position to do that first, because we all thought it was going to be a Clippers-Lakers Western Conference Finals this year, and it was right there, and then the Clippers just completely blew it against the Denver Nuggets. So Ty Lue, new head coach of LA. We'll see if he can get that franchise over the hump. Guys, a pair of headlines with the Houston Rockets. I think it's best to take both of these together because they are intertwined. So first of all, Daryl Morey, the longtime GM in Houston, stepping down after 13 seasons, says he's leaving to spend some time with his family. The Rockets, during that time, with Morey as the GM, had the second best regular season record in the NBA over those 13 seasons. The Rockets have already announced that when Morey steps down, effective November 1st, they will be promoting Rafael Stone, who is currently their vice president of basketball operations, to be their general manager. Now, owner Tillman Fertitta, perhaps most famous for being in charge of Golden Nugget Casino, insisted that Morey's resignation had nothing to do with some controversy he generated last year over a tweet supporting Hong Kong and denouncing China, in which the NBA has a lot of business interests. And this departure of Daryl Morey, one of the best executives in sports, I believe, also comes at a time in which the Rockets are looking for a new head coach. Mike D'Antoni stepped down at the end of the season, and Houston is looking at several candidates, including Jeff Van Gundy, who last coached in the NBA with Houston from 03 to 07. Now, Ty Lue was considered a frontrunner for this vacancy before ultimately taking the Clippers job. Van Gundy, in his 4 years in Houston, made the playoffs 3 out of 4 times. Of course, he before that, coached for the New York Knicks. Guys, a fascinating spot the Rockets find themselves in. They've got a roster that is in a bit of question. I wouldn't say turmoil, but they have some decisions to make with the salary cap. Ownership has indicated a willingness to spend. But guys, a twofold story here. Daryl Morey out in Houston, Jeff Van Gundy on the short list to be the Rockets' next head coach. And both of these things could be a really big shift in the franchise for the Rockets and a really big shift in the NBA out West.
Now, I think it's right to say, Jimmy, that their roster is in flux because they're in kind of a weird position where they make the trade to get Russell Westbrook last offseason, and you have to really question whether or not it made their team better, but it sort of decimated the resources that they have at their disposal. Maybe you feel like they are in a better position, and maybe Chris Paul wouldn't have been able to do what he did in Oklahoma City this past year when having to coexist with James Harden. Sometimes it helps to actually be sort of the number one option to the number one guy running everything instead of having to play to James Harden's strengths as well. And that may not lead to Chris Paul being at his best. But they're going to have to figure out, and in particular in free agency, because that's where they have to make their hay now because they don't have draft picks and players that they can really move. They're going to have to find a way to, on the margins, improve the roster. And I think that's probably the most interesting part of the departure of Daryl Morey. And it ties into the head coaching conversation because when you're talking about improving on the margins, at the end of the day, Russell Westbrook and James Harden are going to have to play really well at a championship level for them to really get to where they want to go. But it's the little things of, hey, maybe we make a coaching adjustment. Maybe we make an adjustment to some of the role players that we are dealing with. And that's the places that they feel like are the only places that they can improve because they're sort of locked into place with the two stars that they have acquired. So I think it's going to really, it's hard to say because you don't know what Houston's organization is going to look like. And if they do end up going with Jeff Van Gundy, you'd have to figure that he's going to command a lot of respect in the building and wield a lot of power. So we talked about this actually with Adam Gase in the NFL, but you think that he's going to be pretty heavily involved in some of the basketball decisions that are made there, as well as a guy who is going to have to be given a pretty good offer to want to leave the TV booth at ESPN. So I assume that he will work in pretty intimate concert with their new general manager and figuring out everything there. But I think that Daryl Morey is going to be a significant loss for them. Jimmy, as you said, and I think you nailed it, he is one of the best executives in all of basketball. And he has tried some things over the last few years that are in the effort to win a championship. And sometimes they've worked, sometimes they haven't. But what he's been able to do in building things in Houston, in getting James Harden, is one of the best trades that we've almost ever seen in the NBA. Just to see what he's done to build that group, I think he's going to be missed. But it's also in part, I think, because he may want to spend time with his family, but very often those are things that are kind of masked and may not be the true story. What I sort of saw on Twitter and as I was monitoring this story was that maybe Tillman Fertitta wants Jeff Van Gundy and Daryl Morey might have wanted to move in a different direction. And if that was the case, I think Fertitta made the wrong decision, because as good as Jeff Van Gundy might be and as much of an impact as coaching can make, Daryl Morey in constructing that roster has done a great job, and I wouldn't have moved on from him.
You know, I certainly agree with you two that Daryl Morey has been an outstanding sports GM. Like Jimmy said, probably one of the best we've seen in all of sports in the last 2 decades, you would say. And, you know, in the event that, you know, what we hear is the truth and that what he wants is to spend more time with his family, he's earned it. You know, I don't think anyone's going to argue that. He's a guy who has been very good at his job, and we've seen that product on the court, one of the best regular season teams in basketball in his 13 years. And, you know, something that both of you touched upon is his ability to take risks at his position, which, you know, can make or break what makes your team better than other teams. You talk about bringing James Harden into Houston, which was a very acute move, I would say. And he did an excellent job in doing that, and was just excellent at his job. So I think as much as as you got a question, where do you go forward in terms of the on-court product, you also have to question, it's like, so Moore had a specific way of doing things, and he decides to step down. Do you as an organization want to hire somebody who wants to go in that same direction? Maybe not precisely in the same direction, but that's a question. You know, he leaves some, I don't want to use the word legacy, but he does leave behind some kind of trail that you can continue to go down. So I think the big question for the Houston Rockets now is, whoever you hire, no matter in that GM position or it be Jeff Van Gundy having a lot of say in basketball operations, as we might call it. The big question for Houston, I think, is in what direction do you want to go as an organization? Do you want to continue down the road that Daryl Moore might have led you down had he stayed in Houston, had he stayed in the public eye, we'll say? Or do you want to go in a different direction? Personally, if I'm the Rockets, I would say, no, I don't want to go in a different direction. I think what they got going is good, and I would continue down that path. But, I'm not going to be the general manager of the Houston Rockets. So the question for them is, like I've said, where do you want to go from here? It's a big question that needs to be answered.
And we'll see how they answer it. Two big executives in sports this week stepping away. You've got Daryl Morey in Houston, Billy Beane with the Oakland A's in Major League Baseball, leaving to be part a minority stake in an ownership group that is looking to purchase the Boston Red Sox. The Rockets are in such a weird spot too. Like, this is an odd time for Daryl Morey to just step away. They've got a roster with Harden and Westbrook that is almost kind of maxed out. I struggle to see how they get significantly better because you've got a guy in Harden who is a superstar, obviously, who's at worst a top 10 player in the NBA. You've got Russell Westbrook, who's going into year 13, who's kind of inefficient. Players like him don't usually age well. So there's been some conjecture about maybe they should move on from him that I tend to agree with. So it'll be interesting to see organizationally what the Rockets decide to do with this roster, because they're approaching a crossroads where they say, okay, you can make a couple trades, try to stay as a contender, or you blow it up. And I don't know exactly what they're going to decide to do, but that'll be an interesting decision for them to make. And the head coaching spot, obviously, too. You've got a guy in Jeff Van Gundy who's been doing the finals on ESPN for 13 years. And now you're going to take him from there back on the sideline. And do I think he could do it? Yes, because he's obviously still very attached to the game. But, how much of a learning curve is it for him, as crazy as that is to say, being that, we've seen what the NBA's gone through in the last 5 years. It's a totally different game than it was the last time he was coaching. So that'll be an interesting process to watch if he does wind up getting the job. One more headline for you guys quickly. And from one Van Gundy, we go to his brother, Stan Van Gundy, who is currently a finalist for the Pelicans head coaching vacancy. New Orleans missed the playoffs this year in year one with Zion Williamson, decided to move on from Alvin Gentry at the end of the season. Stan has coached for 3 different NBA teams, last for the Pistons in 2018. He was also in charge of the front office over there. That did not go terribly well. Guys, just wanted to get your quick reaction as we find out that not just one, but 2 Van Gundys may be coaching in the NBA next year, and Stan Van Gundy looks to be one of the favorites for an up-and-coming Pelicans team to be their next head coach.
I think SVG can work there. I think he can lead them in the right direction with some of the young players is something that he has done in the past. And I think that he can communicate messages well to some of the young players that as he has demonstrated over his career. I think that the important distinction here is that he does not have control over basketball operations, because that seemed to be the demise more than anything else in Detroit. It's tough when you're talking about somewhere that is not exactly a premier free agent destination. So you've got to build through the draft and through smart trades and try and build things up where you really need someone who is dedicated to building your organization the right way from a roster perspective. That's not Stan Van Gundy. They've got a much better roster here in New Orleans. I think from a coaching perspective, that can be a good move. Just don't give him control of the roster decisions.
Absolutely, Nick. Stan Van Gundy is the kind of guy who wants some kind of control of basketball operations. But, when you don't give him that, he will have control as a coach in the way he most can. And when you're trying to build a team that's surrounded around a guy who is as much of a talent as Zion Williamson is, that can be a very good thing. I agree. I think SVG is the right move for New Orleans. And I think he will be a guy who will spearhead building around Zion in the right way to make them a team that can really make some noise.
Yeah, and a lot of this, I think, frankly, depends on whether or not Zion stays healthy. Because if he's not healthy, you could have any coach in there. It's probably not going to matter. I will say, Nick, though, I agree with your point about basketball operations. I think not giving him the opportunity to draft Luke Kennard over Donovan Mitchell probably is a good thing when you look at the future of the New Orleans Pelicans. So, yeah, I like Stan Van Gundy as a basketball mind. I think he's a really smart guy, and I think he could work there. Keep in mind, he is older, 61 years old, but he's got, I would say, a few more years of coaching left in him if he wants to do that. And I think that could work out if he winds up in New Orleans.
For sure. I agree with you, Jimmy, and we'll see how that goes. Still some other candidates that they've got to sort of wade through as well, but I would be interested to see how Stan Van Gundy can adjust to that group. We're going to have to take another break here. On the other side, we will have another installment of our Off the Air podcast. Emmanuel Ribari, Jackson High will sit down with DJ Sixsmith to talk about his time at Rose Hill. Stay with us.
WFUV is a flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Joining us here on the Off the Air podcast is a Fordham alum and WFUV Sports alum. Special guest this week, DJ Sixsmith. DJ, thanks for being here.
What's happening? How you guys doing?
Pretty good. Fire it right back at you. How are you doing? These last few months have been crazy. How's it affected you, your life, your job? How's everything?
Yeah, thankfully, I still have work, and it's been a crazy time. My wife and I just got a puppy, so that's the big news on this front. So a little light of hope here with everything going on. How about you guys? How are you holding up with everything?
Pretty
Doing
good.
great, man. We're trying to move along. Obviously, it's been crazy times, but let's go back to March. You obviously find out that everyone needs to go into quarantine. The world kind of stops. What's your reaction when essentially everything in the sporting world just comes to a complete halt?
I was really stunned. I mean, I can remember working in New York City, right in the middle of March, and my last day in the office timed up with the NBA shutting down and the Utah Jazz game in Oklahoma City. And then the president of the United States is making remarks from the White House. And it was just, in real time, I had no idea that this was going to be the world that was to come, because there had been talks of coronavirus, and especially in New York City too, for my job at CBS, like we had people coming into the studio for interviews and they're talking about this. They're talking about flying from California. We had Stephon Marbury, who came from China, where China had just had the start of COVID-19. So we had a little bit of an idea, but guys, honestly, I couldn't imagine everything shutting down and then college football coming back. And it's just been wild and wacky. And I think as you all know, just the ability to adapt and adjust as sports get shut down is really an important thing.
You mentioned a key word there, adapt, and you referenced your job at CBS Local doing digital and social content. How's that changed, and how have you had to adapt during this time?
Well, it's been a lot more hard news. I mean, it's really understanding what is going on with COVID-19, and especially this summer with the death of George Floyd and the racial injustice conversation. That was a whole separate conversation that I hadn't really really jumped into before. So for me as a social media manager, it's how are we going to present this on social? For me as a content creator, it's who are the people I'm going to talk to, or who are the different types of people that we can bring in? Because honestly, it's been a lot of the same voices. So who are some different people with different perspectives? So yeah, it's kind of been a fly by the seat of your pants type of situation. And also you just have to learn every single day. So part of my job one day was Governor Cuomo was giving his daily press conferences, and I'm live tweeting that. Another day, it's talking to an actor about what's going on with the conversation about racial injustice. And then the next day it could be, talking to somebody like Susan Rice, who used to work in the Obama administration. So as you guys have seen with your college days, it's like, got to be able to do play-by-play, got to produce, got to do updates. Same thing once you get into the workplace, it's that you have to be great at a bunch of different things. You can't just be a one-trick pony. You can't just be a one-tool player. You have to be a five-tool player. And I think the pandemic has really proven that the people that know how to do a lot of different things will end up surviving and doing well in this industry.
DJ, in addition to that, just specifically in play-by-play, adaptability is certainly a huge thing now when so many broadcasters are having to do broadcasts off monitors and so many people aren't in stadiums anymore at this point. You work for Stadium. You're one of their announcers there. Have you had to make significant adaptations in that field, so to speak, yet?
Yeah, so I haven't actually done a play-by-play broadcast since everything happened. I was doing some college basketball for Stadium right before the shutdown, and I'm really thankful for that because it was a long journey just to be able to do college hoops for Stadium, and we can definitely get into that. But yeah, a lot of different announcers are doing games from their living room or doing it off the monitor. And that could really be the future of this thing too, because as you get in the industry, it's really expensive to put on a production, to have people fly in, stay at hotels. Like everybody's trying to do it on the cheap right now. And so whether it's digital or TV, you have to be able to realize, okay, I have to call a game from a stadium, or I've done this a lot in my career. I have to do a game by myself and I have to fill a couple of hours by myself. So it's really being flexible, and it's realizing that even from where I was 5 years ago graduating, the industry is wildly different. And when you all graduate, there's going to be stuff that doesn't even exist right now. So whether it's play-by-play or anything else, I think the biggest thing is just your preparation, because whether it's a blowout, whether it's a close game, whether you're calling a game in a packed stadium or with nobody, you got to bring it every single time and you got to be ready to roll. And this is just another example of that.
So let's go down that play-by-play route, because that's a big part of your background. At what point early on in your life or before college did you decide that play-by-play and sports broadcasting was meant for you?
Oh man, I think from a really early age, I wanted to be an announcer. I mean, I could be remembering when I was in middle school and then we're watching SportsCenter, and I was at these play-by-play broadcasting camps that had just popped up. So that really got everything rolling for me. And then my high school, fortunately, had a radio and TV station. And so from freshman year in high school, I'm getting reps. And listen, like it was rough. It wasn't good stuff, but those reps really helped me because I was 14, 15, 16, learning how to call a game on radio, learning how to do play-by-play for TV, figuring out how to interview people. All that stuff helped out. And then by the time I got to Fordham, it was such an amazing experience working at FUV, and especially for play-by-play. I mean, you certainly know in terms of just traveling with the teams and calling the games and getting to know the players and the coaches, there's nothing like play-by-play because you're the one that is reacting to the action. And it's not scripted, it's completely off the cuff. And that's my favorite thing about it, is that you never know what's going to happen going into a game. And you always have to be prepared for something that you have no idea that's coming. So I think that's my favorite thing about play-by-play. And especially for me, I love hoops. I'm a big basketball junkie. To be courtside, to see the best players in college basketball and the best players in high school doing their thing has been really awesome. And then taking it into a professional career where you just kind of have to do games wherever they pop up. I mean, when I first started, I was doing games for $100 a pop. Like I was working part-time at CBS as a radio host, working at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm waking up at 4 a.m. I'm driving from Connecticut, get into the studio, do a radio show for a couple hours. And then like on a Friday night, I have a high school football game in New Jersey, and I'm sleeping in my car for a couple hours just to get some rest before the game. Like that's the grind. That's how you start out. But as you continue to build things out, there's opportunities down the road.
Let's talk about your time at Fordham. It obviously seems like you went to Fordham for WFUV. Was that an easy decision for you? Was that a sort of no-brainer when you kind of go to Fordham and see the radio station there, or was there was it a big decision in terms of where you wanted to go pursue for 4 years?
It was definitely a big decision. I mean, looking back on it now, Fordham was the best possible situation. I met my wife there. I had an amazing experience at FUV. But for me, it was Fordham or Syracuse. And the two were really neck and neck. And Newhouse is an amazing program. And my cousin's doing the grad program there right now. And I visited there. I really enjoyed it. I had a friend from high school that was going to Newhouse. But I went and visited FUV. I meet Bob Aarons for the first time. And he's just like, listen, you're going to be a kid in a candy shop here. He's telling me about one-on-one. He's telling me about going to the locker room for the Mets and the Knicks. And he's telling me about play-by-play. And I'm like, this is unbelievable. This has got to be the spot for me. And so I still had a tough time making the decision. So in true Bob Aarons fashion, he finds the only person that I know that has gone to both Cuse and to Fordham, and that's Dan Duva, who's doing great work right now in the NHL. And Duva calls me up, and I'm just a senior in high school. He doesn't know me, but he said, listen, I've been at both. Like Fordham's the place to go. And the fact that Bob, he didn't even have me as a student yet, but he went that extra mile to convince me, because I was already dangling on the hook there. But he pushes that one through, and there you go. That's the history right there. So yeah, Fordham was definitely the spot for me, but it was definitely an interesting decision, going back and thinking about it now.
You talked about a really special Bob Aarons quality, that ability to show you how special the program is, but also introduce you to alumni and emphasize the importance of that as well. What kind of impact did Bob Aarons have on your time at Fordham?
He had a monumental impact on my life at Fordham. And honestly, guys, when I think about Bob now, 5 years after college, I'm even more appreciative, because the thing about Bob was that he challenged us. He was tough on us. He didn't let us just slide through with things. I mean, every minute detail he was able to pick out. I mean, I can remember doing volleyball demos, and he's pausing the tape deck and saying, why are you saying it like this? Or how are you doing it like this? We were doing a baseball game at USC my senior year, and I was talking about the clouds, and I said that they're ominous. And we go to a commercial break, and he's like, are those clouds really ominous, DJ? Like, that's the type of attention to detail that Bob Aarons had. I mean, to the point that we did a A10 women's basketball championship game at the Barclays Center, Fordham and St. Joe's. St. Joe's beats Fordham that year. And with radio, you have to paint the picture. I would be in Bob's office. It's like, describe the walls. And I'm like, all right, they're green. And he's like, no, you have to describe it as if somebody couldn't see the action. And so Bob, to true form, found a blind man, put him next to us for the radio broadcast. And he said, paint the picture for him. That's who we're trying to paint the picture for. And that was just an amazing lesson, because he wanted us to get it as well as we could. And that's just the love and attention to detail that he showed. And I talked to him on the phone a couple months ago, and I just said, thank you. Thank you for everything, because I wouldn't be the media person I am today without you. So just little stories like that go a long way. And that's from day one. That's him putting in the extra hours. And I knew from everybody I talked to, I wasn't going to get that somewhere else at a Syracuse or an Ithaca or any other school in the country. There's only one Bob Aarons, and especially with the influence of Marty Glickman, as all of you guys know, like it's truly a one-of-a-kind experience, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
Well, you've already given us a few good Bob stories, and I'm going to ask you for another one if you don't mind. Is there a moment with Bob that stands out, whether it just be like going over a demo like you said, or we've heard a lot of stories about Bob in the car so far on this podcast. Is there one specific moment with Bob that really sticks out in your mind from your time at Fordham?
Well, I had my first New York City driving experience with Bob Aarons. That's one I didn't anticipate. We went to a Curtis Granderson Foundation event at New York Steakhouse, NYKSTK, and the two of us are there, and he's like, okay, here you go. And he gives me the keys, and I'm like, what do you mean? Like, and he's like, you're driving back to Fordham. And I'm like, oh, cool, awesome. Or like, I don't know if anybody else has talked about it, but he put like the steering wheel lock on his car all the time. So when we were doing one-on-one, he's like, can you bring my car up? I would be trying to, get this thing open. And like, that's just the type of situation it was with him. But I think my favorite Bob story was that senior year, we flew out to California and we met Vin Scully. And to see Bob Aarons in front of Vin Scully, because he had talked to him on the phone a bunch and emailed him, but to see somebody he admired so much, Bob wanted to be Vin Scully. And the fact that he got to meet him, and who knows if that was going to happen again, because Vin's obviously older. He wasn't going to come to New York. Like, that was a really special moment because I know how much it meant to him. And the Fordham baseball team was hyped. I got to interview Vin Scully. Like, that's a memory I'll have for life. And so the fact that I got to share that with Bob is a really cool experience.
You're speaking of some of these special moments, going out west, meeting Vin Scully. You were at Fordham during a time where there were a lot of great sports moments as well. The Fordham football team was very good. Fordham women's basketball competing for A10 championships as well. Is there a pinnacle moment to you from your time at Fordham in terms of a game you were around, a game you called?
I mean, my personal favorite game was when my wife, playing for Fordham softball, hit a go-ahead home run against St. Louis in the 2014 A10 tournament. And I'm doing the game with Anthony Pusick. We had done like the entire tournament, so I'd lost my voice. I had no voice at all doing play-by-play. And we just started dating at the time, and she hits that home run. They go up 2-1. They end up winning the championship at Bahoshi Field. Like, that will be the best call of my whole entire life. Like, that just hits me on a different personal level. So that was amazing. But I mean, I can go through every sport. I mean, Fordham women's basketball, not only winning the A10 tournament in Richmond against Dayton, but then going to the NCAA tournament and playing at Baylor. So we fly to Texas, and they're going toe-to-toe with a California team that had made the Final Four really recently. And Aaron Rooney had a chance to win at the end, and the shot gets blocked. So that was an incredible moment. You mentioned Fordham football. Fordham football had one win my freshman year, and then this guy named Joe Moorhead comes in, and suddenly they're starting to turn things around, 6-5, and then they become Patriot League champions. And yeah, I mean, when they beat Bucknell in the Patriot League championship, that was a cool game. The Temple game where they upset a team coached by Matt Rule, who's now the Panthers coach. I was on the sideline for that game, and I see Sam Ajala make that great catch. So the fact that there were amazing moments like that throughout was really cool. I mean, even, calling Eric Pascal's games for a year when I was a senior, and now he's in the NBA. Like, it's really unbelievable, the people that you come into contact with, and also just the trips. Like, the trips were my favorite part. We got to go to San Antonio with the women's basketball team. Coach Gately's son is working for the Spurs at that point. We get, courtside seats to the Spurs game. Like, who does this stuff? Like, it's unbelievable. And then we're going in locker rooms for all these iconic moments. I'm watching Rangers playoff games, and I saw LeBron drop 49 when he was on the Heat against the Brooklyn Nets. Like, just unreal. The fact that we got to do this as college kids, it's really special. And my biggest piece of advice is just enjoy this, because it's a 4 years unlike any other. And there's some cool stuff to do once you get into the industry, but it's not you doing it with your friends. Like, I'm still close with all the FUV people I worked with. We just had a Zoom call a couple months ago. Like, those are your people for life, and you're going to talk about these ridiculous stories forever. So yeah, those are just a few of the memories right there.
Well, that's a perfect transition into what I was going to ask, because obviously you meet so many people at FUV, and the people that you meet are your brothers for life, so to speak. Who are the ones that specifically stick out to you, and who are some of those guys on that Zoom call last week that you mentioned that you really consider your friends for life, essentially?
I think the really cool thing is that you get to know people from multiple grades. So, just from my class, it's Mike Watts, it's Kenny Ducey, Chris Venezia, and Chris Venezia is the one that put that whole Zoom call together. But then it's younger people. It's Matt Morrow and Drew Casey that I get to know. Taris Lejeski, Kelly Coltis. Like, there were so many amazing people. And then some of the older people too. Andrew O'Connell, for example, he's somebody that was a senior when I was a freshman. He's working at St. John's in their communications department. And we have a relationship now where, I see him as a father now. Like, that's an amazing thing. Somebody I met as a freshman in college is now a parent. Like, that's the type of stuff here. And even, people like Jake Kring-Schreifels and Eric Malo and Chris Marasco. Chris Marasco was somebody I did a lot of games with. I saw him right before the pandemic hit. I went down to Florida. My wife was covering Team USA softball. I meet him and his fiance. So these are people you just keep in touch with. And then you guys mentioned all the alums too. I mean, these alums that I met freshman year of college are people that I still keep in contact with, or people that have helped me in my career. Like Peter Saccone, for example, is somebody that did a workshop freshman year as an ESPN radio executive. Years later, I send him a demo update that I do, and I get a job at a demo update at ESPN Radio because of Peter Saccone. Steve Shear at Fox Sports is somebody I send my play-by-play links to all the time to get feedback, even for somebody like me who's 27. I'm still trying to grow. I'm still trying to get better. And that's an incredible thing. Or, like I'm in college and Mike Breen is listening to my Fordham women's basketball tape. Like that's the stuff like you're just not getting anywhere else. So whether it's the people you work with, the people you meet, the relationships, they have the ability to last a really long time. But you also have to be intentional about keeping in touch with these people because they're super busy, whether it's the people you work with or the people that are working in the industry. You have to go out of your way and not only keep a professional relationship, but keep a personal relationship. Like if you talk to Michael K, ask him about his kids, like that stuff just separates things. Like my wife and I, who's my girlfriend at the time, we were in the Rose Hill gym just talking with Michael K for like an hour after a Fordham basketball game, just about life. And then he starts to open up. And like, that's the stuff that goes beyond just saying, hey, will you critique this? Will you listen to this? Like, you really have the opportunity to develop real lifetime relationships with the people you work with and the alums as well.
DJ, in terms of other memories at FUV, obviously I feel like a lot of people have that one road trip that they remember. You mentioned a ton of them moments ago. Is there one specific like road trip with the guys that really stands out from your time at Fordham?
I think it'd be really hard to pick one. I'll mention a few others I haven't talked about. We went to San Francisco for a women's basketball trip over Thanksgiving. So just away from sports and broadcasting, we got to see the full house, the house where they actually did the show, which was pretty cool. We were at the University of San Francisco where Bill Russell was an alum, Pete Rozelle, like we just got to see the statues. But the best part of that was that me and Watts got to play in scrimmage against Fordham women's basketball. And that was a trip because I'm thinking to myself, all right, like I played hoops, like let's give it a shot. Those women are at a whole different level. And I remember I'm playing defense, because Coach Gately's scout team, like they're men playing against women. That's why they're such a great program. I thought I was going to get real sneaky. I poked the ball away from Sam Clark. I start going the other way. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to get me a layup. And Abigail Corning just running all the way back completely alters my shot. And I bricked the layup and I'm like, okay, this is a whole different beast. So like the opportunity to do that, or we did a football game at the University of Cincinnati. Bearcats are a top 25 team, real time, big time college football atmosphere. That was really cool. And then one underrated one was me, Chris Marasco, Mike Valtero. We went to Washington, D.C. We got to, hang out in the nation's capital, but we also got to go see the Around the Horn set with Tony Reale when he was still doing the show in D.C. So for me, having watched him for such a long time, like that was an unbelievable situation. So little moments like that have been just awesome. And again, like this is years down the road, but still thinking about them fondly. I think that's really cool.
You wrapped up your college career in 2015. You're the 2015 recipient of the Marty Glickman Award. What did that honor mean to you?
It was an incredible honor. I mean, I had, asked Bob about Marty a whole bunch. And Marty's book used to be in Bob's office, The Fastest Kid on the Block, because Marty Glickman was this incredible announcer doing football and basketball. He helped start HBO, but also he was a world-class track athlete and should have had his Olympic moment. But because of Hitler, he's Jewish. He doesn't get to have that moment. Jesse Owens steps in his place, and Jesse Owens has an incredible moment. So I feel that more of an impact even now, given all the conversations about social injustice. So just from that standpoint, it's an honor to be associated with somebody like that. And then from a play-by-play perspective, I mean, everybody knows here just the names on that list. I mean, some of the best that have come through Fordham, and the fact that I got to be a part of that was really cool. And to be honored at the Black F Awards with all the athletes, and my wife was there, who was my girlfriend at the time, I get to share with her. Like that's something that I'll always remember. So definitely a cool honor, no question.
DJ, obviously it's a really weird situation for incoming freshmen to come into college at this point and try to get started. I want to ask, what would your advice be to, whether it's just freshmen now or kids in the future who are going to Fordham and making their first few days at FUV? what would be your advice to them as they try to go on this 4-year journey?
My advice would be to do a little bit of everything. I think when I was in college, I was so focused on play-by-play and on air. That was the only thing that I was thinking about. Sports were the only thing I was thinking about. If I could go back, I would try and broaden my horizons a little bit more, because you need to know how to produce. You need to know how to edit video. You need to know how to create social media graphics like that. Those are things that I wasn't focused on. So from day one at Fordham, you should, figure out the digital space. Just try some things, fail a little bit. That's a good thing. And then, of course, hone your craft. Do as many practice broadcasts as you can, or just get in front of a camera and try doing a stand-up. Like, all those things really matter. And then also think about things outside of sports. Take some classes that aren't communications related or journalism related. Fordham has so many great classes. Like, I took a class, History of Drugs in America, and I was able to write a paper about Bias, who's a famous college basketball player at Maryland, gets picked by the Celtics, dies of a cocaine overdose the night of the NBA draft. And I was able to weave that into how America really formulated its whole drug policy. So, like, those are the opportunities at Fordham that are incredible. So the industry is going to be there. Like, I was so excited just to get going and get working in the professional industry. But like I said before, just take the time, enjoy it, because as I've talked about, it can be a really wild and wacky roller coaster outside of the walls of Fordham. So just enjoy the time as long as you have it.
DJ, great insight, great reflections. Appreciate you taking a few minutes to join us today.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure.
Check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVSports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Final hour back here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Nick DeLuca, Dylan Balsamo, Jimmy Sullivan doing our updates, Alex Woles producing our show. Let's get into some college football because we have a massive matchup in the SEC. Number 2, Alabama will host the number 3 ranked Georgia Bulldogs. Kirby Smart against his former assistant Kirby Smart against his former mentor, Nick Saban. And a lot of hype and some interesting circumstances surrounding this game. Nick Saban, of course, during the week, testing positive for COVID-19. He has since produced the necessary negative tests to presumably be on the sideline tonight coaching this game. Now, he was asymptomatic, so we assume that he will do so. But regardless, just another wrinkle to what is going to be a fantastic matchup between two of the best teams in all of college football, with some serious college football playoff implications on the line, because you've got two teams that are meeting. They don't generally meet this early. This is, as we talked about on College Football Gridiron, I'll plug it. Me and Jimmy and I had taken care of that earlier in the week. But as we talked about, you're not usually seeing this matchup this early. It's one that's usually reserved for the SEC championship game, but we're getting it now, week number 4 of the college football regular season in the SEC. And I am fascinated by this matchup between a team that has played really good defense in Georgia and has really just blown the doors off of people defensively in Alabama with their high-powered offense.
Yeah, this is certainly, like you said, it's very rare we get a game like this, specifically between the two of them, this early in the season. To see 2 and 3 match up at this point in the year is always particularly strange when it happens. But look, like you said, it kind of gives us fodder as fans to really sort of get a grasp on what the college football playoffs are going to look like. Like you said, these two teams don't usually meet until the SEC championship game. So to see them compete this early gives us kind of an idea of how accurate our rankings are at this point, and what kind of teams these two really are. You talked a lot about no, you didn't talk a lot. You talked for like a second about how good Georgia's defense has been, how Alabama has kind of been the opposite defensively, as good as they have been and always are offensively. So tonight's going to be a real test of has Alabama's defense just been them not trying too hard because they haven't had to, and are they going to come down to it tonight against the Bulldogs?
So Alabama, we'll break down this matchup a little bit further. Alabama's offense was superb last weekend. They beat Ole Miss 63-48 in a game that was much closer than I think a lot of people would have expected. Lane Kiffin in year one at Ole Miss, that generally doesn't go too well when you're a first-year head coach, particularly trying to get your footing in the SEC. Lane Kiffin is a veteran of college football, but his first year at Ole Miss, and they gave Alabama a run for their money. They run for over 200 yards on the ground. They're able to score those 48 points, and it was just really uncharacteristic of both Alabama and the SEC. This is a program that we are accustomed to seeing and a conference that we are accustomed to seeing great defense being played at and in. Neither was the case in this game over the weekend, and Alabama has some serious questions about how they're going to deal with things defensively because Georgia has a much better offensive line. They have a much better running attack. Stetson Bennett has done enough on the offensive side of the football to manage the game and make some good throws. He's thrown for 5 touchdowns this year. So you have to figure that with Georgia's O-line and the weapons that they have in the running game, they can expose, if they can get the right game script, can expose some of the deficiencies, particularly in Alabama's run game.
Absolutely. I would say, we talked about how rare a matchup of this stature is this early in the season. And Alabama traditionally and typically through the first, you could say, handful of games of their season, they don't really need to worry about defense because, their offense is good enough where it's not something they have to worry about. And even, that their game last week against Ole Miss, there's still a 15-point game. So but this is the true test, like we've been saying. Georgia's defense, it's 12.3 points allowed per game to this point in the year is what Georgia has allowed. And you think in the matchup of an offense as strong as Alabama's against defense, like Georgia's, something's got to give. And we're probably going to see that tonight. It's going to be a very close game. And it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see what the one deciding factor will be. You talked about perhaps issues in Alabama's running game. That could be the factor that decides this game tonight. But it could be a handful of different things, of other things. So, and that will be left up to tonight to decide.
And Alabama has so many weapons offensively, too. Mac Jones has done a great job in operating that offense. He took over at the back end of last year with an injury to Tua Tagovailoa, and all he has done is just make this the top offense in the country. 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, and just 1 interception so far through 3 games. Najee Harris is playing like one of, if not the best running backs in the entire country. We expected him to be very good, 347 yards and 10 touchdowns already through 3 games, which is ridiculous. Jalen Waddle has just south of 400 receiving yards, is one of the better, if not the best wide receiver in the country. So Alabama has some serious offensive weapons, and we'll see if Georgia is going to be able to slow those down. I think it's going to come down to really the battle of the line of scrimmage. As much as as unsexy as that is, I think it's really going to come down to who can control the line of scrimmage and who can get off to a good start, because I think the game script and the way that this game plays out is going to be crucial. Alabama is an offense that can score with the best of them. And if they're able to get out to an early lead, they can dictate the way Georgia has to play offensively, because they're going to have to start throwing the football. If Alabama can get out to a 14-point lead early with their offense, get a stop with that defense, and then they'll be able to score. Even though Georgia, you would assume, will do a better job, they'll be able to score in this game. So if they can dictate to Georgia that they're going to have to play from behind and throw the football, I think that plays to Alabama's strength, because Georgia can't get into what they really want to do. On the other side, if Georgia is able to take an early lead, Alabama is going to be in trouble, because Georgia can then grind out the clock. They can use their running game, and they can really go to work on the ground and play to their strength, where Stetson Bennett, a guy who is a game manager, isn't going to throw the football 30 to 40 times. That's not where Georgia wants to live. That's exactly where Alabama wants them to live. So I think that one of the most important things to pay attention to in this matchup is going to be, how did these teams start and how does that dictate the game script? If Georgia can sit there and run the ball 40 times, I think you're going to like their chances. And if Alabama can force them to throw the ball 40 and 50 times, Alabama's going to like where they're at.
100%. To what you're saying, Nick, I think tonight, the first quarter specifically is going to be crucial. If you look at a team like the Crimson Tide, we've traditionally seen in the first, month and a half of the season, like we've been playing, they kind of make their money in that first quarter. They jump out to a really quick lead really early, whether that be 2 touchdowns in the first quarter is something that wouldn't be surprising to see in an Alabama game. And then they're able to hold you a couple times, and they score a few more times, and that's how they win. But again, this Georgia team is a team that specifically the D-line can hold you. They only allowed 6 points against Auburn 2 weeks ago. That's really impressive. So I think most of specifically the momentum, that's always a factor, especially in football, I would argue more than any other sport. That first quarter is going to matter. In that if Georgia can hold Alabama in the first quarter, I don't think they're going to hold Alabama to 6 points overall in the game like they did with Auburn. That's just not the team they're playing. It's not the reality of tonight. But if they can hold Alabama to maybe just 1 score in the first quarter, if that's possible, I think Georgia might have this in the bag if they were able to do that. But either way, this is going to be a very tough-fought game that I'm personally very excited to see. I'm sure you are as well.
No, I'm going to be glued to my television tonight and watching that game, because it is one of the best matchups, the premier matchup in all of college football this weekend. And I want to just taper the conversation for a second to Nick Saban in a moment, but I am interested in that as well. It's going to be about the fast start and who can dictate, because that's just going to have such an impact on this game to just allow both teams to play to their strengths. But to Nick Saban, who is one of, if not the greatest coach in all of college football, has the positive test and kind of throws his team for a loop, and it's no fault of his own. And we're happy that Nick Saban is going to be healthy and presumably on the sidelines tonight coaching this game, as all is well with his symptoms and the effects of COVID-19 on him, of course, an older gentleman in his own right. But I'm just interested and kind of fascinated to see if that's going to have any impact on the game tonight about what he can and cannot do. Is he going to be more reliant on some of his assistant coaches, Steve Sarkisian, who has run the offense beautifully through the first 3 games of the season for Alabama, and yet is a guy who hasn't had a ton of success as a head coach, albeit he's been one before? And is he going to need to get more involved on the defensive side of the football? Because that's where Nick Saban has made his name throughout his entire career, and their defense has been pretty dreadful through the last few weeks. So I'm just interested to see what, if anything, how, if any, in any way, this game will be affected by Nick Saban testing positive for COVID-19, and just the overall sort of impression for his team as they deal and navigate with something that is different in a week that they maybe wanted everything to be the same because they need to get their preparation on the way they want it to.
Nick, I think something that's key to remember in the situation that currently surrounds Nick Saban, however you want to put it, is there's a lot of things that we don't know because, you know, we only know what we know from reports. We know the last 3 tests he's taken have been negative. We know that he had the 1 positive test before that. We don't know if that was one could imagine it was a false positive. And presuming these last 3 were true negatives. So either he was either it was a false positive that has since been proven untrue, or he had it and now he doesn't have it anymore, which is a less likely scenario, but still a possibility. But another thing about Nick Saban is you and I both know him as a ruthless head coach, one who will do what needs to be done for his team. Not that I think he would break rules or protocols, but I also didn't see any way in which he was not going to be on the sidelines for this game. Just does not sound like a Nick Saban scenario to me. But it's funny, you kept saying being on the sidelines for the game. I also think if he could not have been on the sidelines for this game, I still think he would have been able to have some kind of influence on it from another place, if you get what I'm saying. I'm not saying he's going to be Bobby Valentine with the Groucho Marx glasses after being ejected from a game, but I think, you know, the hierarchy there is with him on top in the Alabama football program is clear, and I think he's definitely would have had an influence on this game, to put it in one way, had he been there, had he not been there.
Yeah, and he certainly would have had an impact on game planning and everything else. Again, Nick Saban asymptomatic for COVID-19, so he was able to conduct some of the practices and some of the things that he did virtually. Of course, he wouldn't be there in game to presumably help make some of the adjustments that they would have needed to make against a team that is really well coached in Kirby Smart. And I think that that's one of the other angles to take with this game, and what's fascinating, because Nick Saban has had to divert some of his attention away from just strictly game planning for this week and having to deal with what now can be tabbed as an off the field issue because he's all right. But Kirby Smart and that Georgia staff has been able to just purely focus on football, and that's not something that Alabama has had the advantage of doing. And again, in a matchup that's going to be this close, every advantage helps. The spread right now, which I think is a little bit too big, is Alabama -5.5. I would not, I'm again not a betting man, but I would not expect Alabama to cover that. I think this is going to be a very close game, and I recognize that Alabama is the team at home. The game will be played 8 o'clock tonight on CBS at Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa. But I think that that's the product of the spread, just because you're looking at Alabama being at home. But we'll get into the pick'em here, and I'll go to you first, Dylan, about who you are going to take tonight. But this is such a tough matchup to take and to break down and to see, because I think it is just so much. There's so much riding on the way the game plays out in terms of game script to see how it'll go. But I'm interested to hear who you got tonight.
It's a tough decision. Perhaps one of the toughest I've made in my life, which goes to show you how easy my life has been. But more than anything, it's as good as Georgia has been and is going to keep being. To bet against Alabama at home is a tough bet to make. So I'm going to take Alabama by 3 points. Alabama by a field goal is what I'm going to say for tonight. What do you think?
This was a tough one, and on College Football Gridiron, I did pick Alabama, so I guess I got to stay with that. And now I will say that the Nick Saban situation was after I picked it. So I got to tell you, I am more leaning toward flipping to Georgia, but I won't do that because I want to keep it consistent. But if you don't think the Georgia Bulldogs have a chance tonight to go into Bryant-Denny and take a win, you are sadly mistaken, because they are a very good football team. My man Jimmy Sullivan, doing our headlines tonight, also on that College Football Gridiron podcast, did take Georgia as well. So we'll see if he's proven right. It could be a rough Wednesday for me next week if Jimmy is right and I am wrong. But I'm sticking with Alabama. I just think that in these situations, it tends to be that the team with the better offense prevails. I think they will control the game enough, make Georgia throw enough to get out of their rhythm and what exactly they want to do. I don't think you can play this 20-17 game with Alabama. I think it's going to be high scoring. I think Alabama is going to score 30 or over, and when they do that, they usually win. So give me Alabama over Georgia. We got to take a quick break. On the other side, we'll get to more NFL pick'em as we wrap up our final hour here on One on One. Some interesting games to break down. Stay with us. You don't even need to watch on Sunday. We'll tell you who's going to win right after this. To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back, everybody. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show, taking you up until 2 a.m., currently 1:48. Good to have you with us. Alongside my guys, Nick DeLuca and Dylan Balsamo, I'm Jimmy Sullivan, here to take you through some NFL picks. Not a lot of time, so let's get right to it. Let's start with a really intriguing game, I think, this weekend. Cleveland at Pittsburgh. Browns looking for first place, possibly, in the AFC North. Steelers coming in undefeated at 4-0. Nick, I will start with you. Who you got in this one, Browns or Steelers?
Jimmy, I'm fascinated by this matchup because I'm really impressed with the way that Cleveland has played this year. I did not expect it. I think their defense has stepped it up, and I love what they are doing on the offensive side of the ball to protect some of the weaknesses that they have, focusing more on the running game. I don't know that they're using their personnel in the best way possible, but they are doing what works, and that's all that you can ask for. 4-1 is a great start for the Browns. Pittsburgh has been there, done that. They've got one of the best defenses in all of the NFL, and their offense is doing enough. A good running game, James Conner, Ben Roethlisberger making smart decisions. This one I think should be close, but you can't pick against the Steelers at home. I don't like to pick on history, but I'm going to do it here. Browns have had no success against Pittsburgh since they came back into the NFL. They're not going to have any here. The Browns are still a step away. Give me the Steelers.
I agree that the Browns are still a step away, but they have been playing so well for the last few weeks. And, maybe they will hit a rough patch going into Pittsburgh and having to play them. But for right now, in terms of, I'll make this quick. I don't see myself betting against the Browns right now. The defense has been unexpectedly good. They got a lot of talent offensively. I'm gonna take the Browns. The line on this game right now, I think, is 3.5 in favor of Pittsburgh.
It is.
I think it's probably a good line. But I'm going to take the under on that. I'll take Cleveland.
I think the loss of Nick Chubb probably hurts Cleveland a bit, but their offensive line's been really good. I'm going to take Cleveland also. Maybe I'll regret betting on Baker Mayfield over Ben Roethlisberger. Not sure. Probably will.
I think you will.
Yeah. But you guys can make fun of me for that on Monday. That's no problem. I'm going to take Cleveland over Pittsburgh. So we got that one at 1 o'clock. 4:25, an interesting one. Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, perhaps for the final time. Packers at Buccaneers. Most of the country is going to see this one. I'm really looking forward to it. Packers coming in undefeated. Tampa Bay is at 3-2 after their Thursday night loss to the Chicago Bears. Guys, how are we looking at this one? Nick, I will start with you.
Yeah, I'm really interested by this matchup too, because I think a lot of things play in the Buccaneers' favor. First of all, the game is at home. They're coming off a longer week, and they've had more time to game plan, rest up, and get healthy. But I just don't see Tampa Bay walking away with a win with the way that the Packers are playing right now. I am just really impressed with that offense, with Aaron Rodgers playing at a ridiculous level right now. I mean, do you think he's upset that they drafted Jordan Love in the first round? He looks incredible. Aaron Jones in that running game is getting it done. Devontae Adams on the outside. They have the weapons that they have are really being put to good use. And I think that they have enough defensively too. Jair Alexander is playing some really good football right now at defensive back and is blossoming into one of the better corners in all of the NFL. And they've got enough pass rush with Zadarius Smith to put some pressure on Tom Brady. I'm not in love with what I've seen from Tampa Bay's offense recently, particularly against Chicago on Thursday night. I know it's a short week. I know you have to travel, but they haven't really been able to put it together. They've had some injuries, which I think hasn't helped things with them trying to get on the same page in a shortened off season. But I think I'm going to go with the team that has been there and done that, and the quarterback that is playing better right now. Give me the Packers to beat the Buccaneers.
I'm going to agree with you on this one, Nick. I'm also going to take the Pack over Tampa Bay right now. You know, and as Nick mentioned, the Bucs have been playing well overall. You know, I think Tom Brady's performed quite well in a Tampa Bay uniform. But at the end of the day, you know, Aaron Rodgers has been playing magnificently. Packers have been running the ball really well this season. I am also going to take the Packers by a small margin, but I'm going to take the Packers.
I find the narrative fascinating of Aaron Rodgers going scorched earth against his own front office. I think that's absolutely wonderful. You know, at 43 years old, I don't know what you expect from Tom Brady. And we've seen, you know, a bit of both. We've seen 5 touchdowns. We've seen, oh my God, I thought it was 3rd down, but actually it's 4th. I think we'll get good Tom Brady this week. So give me Tampa Bay. I think Love averages. Green Bay's got to run into a loss eventually. And it's an interesting game. Tampa Bay will have some fans. That's probably not too much of a factor. But they have the longer week, as you said, Nick. And I think this will be a turnaround for them. And I think they pull the upset. All right, Nick, here's one near and dear to your heart. Monday evening, Kansas City and Buffalo. Chiefs coming off the upset loss to Las Vegas. Buffalo losing on Tuesday Night Football, big to Tennessee. Both of these teams looking to avoid a 2-game losing streak. Nick, your Bills coming in as the underdog against Kansas City. Can they pull the upset?
I agree that they should be underdogs, but I'm going to pick them. Give me the Bills to pull off the upset over Kansas City. And look, I get it. I'm a little biased, but I think they can do it. You're talking about Kansas City having to travel across the country, which is no bargain in 2020. But I'm confident that the Bills are going to get healthy. I recognize that the showing against Tennessee was not good. And look, they had to put together 2 game plans and figure out who they were playing. And then all of a sudden they were playing Tennessee Tuesday night. So they've been there. They've done that. They've gotten over it. They're going to need to find a way to answer some of the questions that they've had defensively because their offense has been good enough. Josh Allen has played fantastically through the first 5 weeks. I know that was probably his roughest effort of the year against Tennessee, but I don't put that really all on him. It was more of an offensive line effort that allowed Tennessee to do some things with coverages that they shouldn't have been allowed to do with not a stacked box, because the Bills should be able to run the football. So they'll need to find a way to do that. And they're getting healthy. They're going to have Tre'Davious White back as a corner, it seems like, who was practicing in full pretty much all week. He is a big deal and means a ton to their defense. They're going to get Matt Milano back, it looks like, at linebacker, who is a big loss for them this past weekend. Hopefully Tremaine Edmonds, who's their middle linebacker, can continue to get healthy. But it seems like they are getting healthier on the defensive side of the ball. I'm not a huge fan of Kansas City's defense, and I think they should be able to run the football. I think the Bills can dictate some of that game script, and I think they can pull the upset against the Chiefs on Monday night. Surprise everybody. Give me the Bills.
Wow, surprise, surprise. Nick, I will certainly give you that the Bills are a good team this year. I like how they look this year a lot. And, you know, they are 2-0 at home coming into this game. But the Chiefs are also 2-0 on the road, and that's worth saying something. As much as you talk about the difficulty for them of coming into Buffalo, they've proven to this point in the season that they can perform on the road. I think the Chiefs are just a better team at this point. It's hard to bet against them. Clyde Edwards-Helaire can really run the football, and I think we're going to see a little more of that in Buffalo on Monday. So I'm going to take the Chiefs.
I'm also going to take the Chiefs. I think the Bills, I feel bad because this is a really tough back-to-back here. You've got the Titans, who are playing really great football, who somehow used the coronavirus as bulletin board material. And then you have no, they did. It's true. And then you have the Chiefs, who are probably the best team in football till we're proven otherwise, I would think, or at least they're up there. So, yeah, give me Kansas City. I still like Buffalo. I still think they're the best team in this division, and I still think they'll ultimately win it. But they're not getting the win this week, I don't think. So give me Kansas City. Last one here before we wrap up. Monday Night Football, Arizona Cardinals, Dallas Cowboys. Interesting matchup. Cowboys without Dak Prescott. Arizona coming off the win against the Jets last week, but everybody beats the Jets now. So interesting game here on Monday night. Guys, how are we looking at it?
Arizona has not really impressed me. They got off to a good start, and I thought that this was going to be a team that was going to take a leap, and then they lose to Detroit, and you're kind of sitting there saying, all right, what do we have here? Because this team might not be as good as we might have thought. But Dallas is terrible. They just really, defensively in particular, are just so bad. And you hope that Dak Prescott can make a speedy recovery and don't want to ignore that situation in Dallas, but they are now turning to Andy Dalton at a backup quarterback. And I still think that their offense can be competent and pretty good. And in some ways, it actually may help their offense because they will turn to running the football more, which will help them on defense. But they're still so atrocious defensively. I don't know that there's any way they're beating Arizona. They can't contain DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler Murray.
I think the Cowboys fooled a lot of people this past week when, you know, the Giants played what might be their best game of the season against Dallas this year, and Dallas still beat them, which says more about the Giants than just about the Cowboys. But the Cowboys are still not a very good football team. And, of course, you know, watching what happened to Dak Prescott, it was very unfortunate, and you feel terrible for him. I do think Ezekiel Elliott is a great runner of the football, as one might say. But I agree, Dallas is just not in a place to beat Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins right now. So I am also going to take Arizona.
Well, you guys have no faith in the Red Rocket to go get a win?
No.
Good, I don't either. Give me Arizona. I think I said this on NFL Friday before we wrap up. It's a good litmus test for a young team that's been inconsistent. I think the Cardinals will pass. Kyler Murray will have a big game, and I think Arizona wins.
Well, there you have it. You don't even need to watch the games on Sunday. We just told you what's going to happen. So there you go. Guys, that should just about do it for us here on One-on-One. Our thanks to our special guest, DJ Sixsmith, for Jimmy Sullivan, Dylan Balsamo, and Alex Woles, who has been great with our production. I'm Nick DeLuca saying, see you later. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.